are asking for some additional patience where we are awaiting the arrival of the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, and our Minister, Honorable Camilo Gonsalves. But in the interim, whilst we wait, we will have an interlude for you by Mr. Jamal Francis on hand.
Want to say hello to my boss.
You came in.
On yesterday, last night.
contribution history, simulate an estimate of your pension, and even file a report if you note that contributions are missing from your work history. To download the app, visit the Play Store or Apple Store from your Android or Apple device and search My NIS. Once you're done, complete the registration form with your personal information. You must have your NIS number and an email address. After you've submitted your form, our team will review, and once all of the information is correct, you'll be sent an approval email within 2 business days. Here's how you use the app. For contribution checks, navigate to Contribution. You'll be able to view your contribution history. If you note there are missing contributions, select Missing Contributions. Input the name of the employer from whom your contributions are missing, the year of work, the period in terms of the month, and your monthly salary. Then select Save. Our team will review your report and look into it. For a simulation of your pension, navigate to Pension. Here, you'll be able to see your projected pension. Please note, this is just an estimate. Easy, right? Now be sure to share this demo with a friend. The National Insurance Services, protecting you in uncertain times.
Well, I would have grown up in Social Security. I worked here for most of my life.
The experience working in Social Security has really allowed us to have a great appreciation for life, appreciation for how you impact persons' life.
We're usually aware of when pensions are being paid, as our offices are usually crowded on some Fridays.
I think it's something that many persons take for granted, and we see the impact it has on those persons almost every week.
Sickness, maternity, employment injury, death, retirement, and most recently, the temporary unemployment benefit.
We deal with customers who would come in to make a claim, whether it is for a pension, a sickness benefit, or employment injury. And when we relate to them that they don't have sufficient contributions for a full benefit or any benefit at all, the look on their faces or the stories that they really tell you that they were truly dependent on the NIS during this period.
I had an encounter with a family who had just suffered the loss of a loved one.
A young man who walked into the office, and himself and his family were receiving survivor's payments from the death of his father many years ago. But he had gotten to the age of 18, so his payments would have stopped.
I had an encounter with a gentleman who had a terminal ailment. He explained his situation, and I tried to assist him to obtain a benefit.
He was in Form 5, getting ready for his exams, but if his payments could not continue, he would have to drop out of school to look for a job to support his family, because his mom was at the moment taking care of his older brother who was born with autism, and she's been his caretaker from birth. So this was their only source of income.
It made me realize the importance of the support that we offer. It wasn't long after he passed away, and his common law wife came to the office and asked for me directly and said he was grateful for the assistance I gave him over the time, and he wished that I would assist her in obtaining whatever benefit was required. And she broke down in tears.
We made a case through the manager of customer service to the director, put forward their situation, and in accordance with our legislation, their benefit payments were brought back in and continued.
And that is why we say to customers, it is important that you come into us, you do the necessary checks, and you ensure that you have the sufficient contributions that are required for each benefit. Don't wait until it is time to make a claim for a benefit.
NIS is mandated to provide a social safety net to citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
I would have seen the changes over the years, where we would have moved from a mere income replacement to a major contributor to the social and economic development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
For a lot of persons, the vast majority, NIS was their only source of income.
The burden on the population today would be a bit more than yesterday because people today are having less children. So that is something we have to look at going into the future.
I encountered a lady and she was looking to assist her father in getting a funeral grant.
No one expects the worst, but it's important to prepare for it.
As I interview persons, it left me with tears in my eyes. And I wanted to know the reason why. Why was it that there were so much persons, older individuals, who really had no means at the end of their working career?
To have a level of pension that allow them to be protected from poverty, including their beneficiaries.
You see people make claims and you realize that they are not in a permanent job. So once they're not being paid in full, they have no personal savings or anything to rely on.
After working here and I see the need for NIS to provide monies for pensioners, and even those who are not pensioners, in times of need, that is why the reality actually sunk in that NIS has a vital role to play in our society.
The most significant contribution to date is the temporary unemployment benefit.
Over 80% of those persons, their sole dependence was on NIS.
The notion of paying an unfunded benefit for almost a year is unprecedented.
What stands out most to me is dealing with the customers, dealing with the pensioners. You know, hearing their stories, hearing just how important NIS is to them, and not only them, but for their kids and grandkids.
The interaction with the pensioners. They allow you to walk a mile in their shoes. They share their experiences over the years.
Sickness benefit and pension, that's all you all have to offer. So I said to him, no, we have various benefits that we can offer you. I even explained to him that we have an invalidity benefit. This is a benefit whereas if you get injured on your job, you can apply for it and we can assist.
I do apologize for the late start once more, and I welcome you to the National Insurance Services panel discussion on pension reform. Before we begin, I'd like to invite one of our board members, Director Lily Cato, to lead us in a word of prayer.
Let us stand. Almighty God and our Father, we pause to recognize your provident presence in the stillness of this room. Lord, we gather to praise your name because it is holy and it is good. And we want, like the psalmist, to say, that we will continue to praise your name to our brethren, and we will praise your name in the congregation. Lord, we want to thank you at this moment for all the good that you have bestowed on us this day, all the blessings. And Lord, we thank you for those we are to receive. Lord, we ask you to bless this institution, the National Insurance Services. And we thank you, Lord, for its achievements. But Lord, we are not without our anxieties. Many are our concerns, our challenges. But Lord, we thank you for the courage to sustain, and we want to say like Paul, in the face of anxiety, your grace is sufficient. Lord, we want to thank our panelists, and we thank them, Lord, for coming. We want you to write the answers on their minds and on their hearts, and the utterances on their tongue. We thank you, Lord, for their helping us to make the case for pension reform. Lord, we want to bless this nation, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we thank you for the peace and tranquility that exists. And Lord, we pray that your peace that surpassed all understanding may remain with us, and we thank you for the success of this meeting. This we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Director Cato. Please remain standing for the national anthem on pan by Mr. Jamora Francis. Thank you, Mr. Francis. You may have your seats. Honorable Camila Gonçalves, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology with responsibility for Social Security, other members of Cabinet, other members of Parliament, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Mr. Lennox Bowman, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the National Insurance Services, other members of the Board of Directors of the National Insurance Services, Mr. Stuart Haynes, Director of the National Insurance Services, Mr. Derek Osborne, NIS's Actuary, Mrs. Judith Vera, Actuarial Consultant, Mrs. Joanna Burgess, Social Protection and Occupational Safety and Health Specialist with the International Labour Organization, members of the clergy, permanent secretaries and senior civil servants, members of the business community, members of the media, other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Over the last few months, pension reform has widely been discussed in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As the institution mandated to provide social protection to all insured persons in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and their dependents, it is our responsibility to educate our valued stakeholders on pension reform. This evening, you will hear from 4 esteemed panelists who will make presentations on pension reform, not only in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but in the ECCU territories, and on policies that are necessary to strengthen the sustainability of the National Insurance Services Fund. We hope that this evening's discussion will be enlightening, and that you recognize that we have to embrace pension reform to secure our future together. Before we get to our discussion, however, I would like to invite the chairman of the National Insurance Services Board, Mr. Lennox Bowman, to deliver some remarks.
Thank you very much, Avia. Honorable Camila Gonzalez, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology with responsibility for Social Security. Other members of the Cabinet, other members of Parliament, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor of the ECCB, other members of the Board of Directors of the NIS, Mr. Stuart Haynes, the Director, fellow panelists, other special invited guests, and I just want to recognize the presence of past Deputy Director, Dr. Minerva Glasgow, and I think I also saw past FC Lennox Tim. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, as chairman of the NIS, I wish to thank you for the opportunity to address you at this panel discussion, which I believe is going to be very enlightening to every one of us here. It is really an esteemed privilege and an honor to welcome you to the discussion on pension reform under our theme, Embracing Pension Reform to Secure Our Future Together. This event marks an integral part of our social dialogue with stakeholders on pension reform towards securing our future together. At the level of the board, we champion and promote good governance in the administration of your NIS. We provide strategic oversight to management for bolstering internal governance in the operations of the NIS. For instance, in 2021, the board engaged an independent international organization comprising professionals from the ISA and the World Bank to perform an independent and comprehensive assessment of the internal governance and operations of the NIS. This independent diagnosis revealed that the NIS's governance and operational framework are sound and aligned with best practices. For the NIS, governance is not merely a strategic priority, it is the core of our being. On our journey to further bolster our governance practices and procedures, we are strategic and international in adopting a comprehensive consultation process around pension reform. To this end, we contracted a professional consultant to develop a communication plan to provide a pragmatic roadmap for the NIS to engage and educate the public on a sustained basis in all aspects of our services, including the pension reform process. In the coming weeks and months, we will continue to build public awareness on this matter via extensive face-to-face engagements with the stakeholders and with targeted and tailored public outreach programs via traditional and social media platforms. We will remain connected with you. We at the NIS are mindful that where there is a lack of understanding, fear will find fertile ground to grow. We understand the fiduciary nature of the organization and remain committed in thought and action to a sustainable NIS for all of us. The board is pleased with the management's progress in soliciting the views of the public and for educating the public on Social Security and pension reform. We applaud the management's efforts to consult with the government, opposition, employers, employees, union, and the general public over the last few months. In the last week, management interacted with over 400 teachers from various secondary schools across St. Vincent and the Grenadines on the matter of pension reform. This evening signals the great commitment by the NIS to build a social security literacy among individuals. Not only just individuals, but households and communities. We are bringing together 4 regional citizens who are expert leaders and critical and independent thinkers in the social security field. They would share their opulence of knowledge with you on vital aspects of reforming social security, including reform measures, risk management, investment, and social security financing. We welcome your interaction and suggestions in this process. This session is designed to take a consultative approach. Permit me to emphasize that your views are important in shaping the reform measures. We want to hear your voice in crafting reform measures that suit our Vincentian values and realities. Pension reform is everywhere. For NIS SVG, it has been a multi-year policy priority. However, we are now approaching the execution year. As the minister indicated in his address to Parliament, the reform measures would form part of the 2024 budget address. We thank the government for its unstinting support to ensure that the NIS operates on a sustainable financial and actuarial basis, as well as their support and acknowledgement and continued respect for our governance processes. Our collective and coordinated efforts to promote the sustainability of the NIS amidst the exogenous challenges of population aging, uncertain economic development, and a mature and generous defined benefit plan, this must redound to the success for all people in this blessed land. Our NIS, your NIS, continues to be a properly run organization, and the NIS remains the best investment for our workers. In closing, we are confident that all Vincentians would come together and embrace pension reform to secure our future together. I want to just thank you again for the opportunity to speak and for your attention. We have an esteemed panel here and some lively and enlightening discussion, and I'm sure the panel will be happy to answer any questions you may have on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to take this opportunity now to invite our very own Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology with responsibility for Social Security, Honorable Camilo Gonsalves, to deliver some remarks as well.
Good afternoon to my brother minister, the Minister of Education. I want to apologize up front for the current absence of some of my other brother and sister ministers, but as many of you know, Wednesday is cabinet, and the meeting of the cabinet is still ongoing, and Curtis and I had to ask for a special dispensation to get out of cabinet to be here with you today. Our other members of parliament, the honorable members for East and Central Kingstown, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the chairman of the NIS, Mr. Lennox Bowman, other members of the board of directors of the National Insurance Service, Mr. Stuart Haynes, the director of the NIS, the panelists who are all here today. It's a very actuary-heavy panel. I think there are three or five of the panelists are actuaries, and other specially invited guests, members of the media, very importantly representatives of the labor movement who I see present today, the Chamber of Commerce, other representatives of the private sector, permanent secretaries, former experts in this field, Dr. Glasgow and others, Luke Brown, who has particular expertise in this area as well. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I don't want to speak too long and to detract from what I hope will be a very enlightening panel discussion today. I'm very happy that the director of the NIS, Mr. Stuart Haynes, has convened this and many other engagements with stakeholders since the government announced at the beginning of this year that we would be making the reform of the NIS and pensions more broadly a critical part of this government's and this nation's resilience building mechanism going forward. The members of the labor movement will recall that when we had conversations related to the most recent wage package, we invited Mr. Haynes, even then, to come and share with you the broad parameters of what NIS reform would look like. And we have been steadfast this year in insisting that NIS reform not only be placed on the front burner for discussion, but also for action going forward. And we cast it as part of our resilience building for a very simple reason. Our countries are small. Our countries lack large financial cushions. And in every aspect of our development, we have to try to look down the road and see where we can build resilience against future shocks. And we've done it, for example, and it's not NIS, but it's the same resilience building. We've done it when we set up a contingencies fund. Because we know, even though we don't know when, we know that natural disasters will affect us. And we have to set something aside to prepare for that eventuality. And we have changed laws, and we have modified building codes, and we have prepared ourselves for the eventualities as best we can of future exogenous shocks. And we have tried to make our economy more resilient against future exogenous shocks. And similarly, we are in a position now where looking forward, we see that we have to make the NIS and the pensions of Vincentians more resilient against demographic shocks and changes that are coming down the road. And Stuart and his team have been exemplary in leading these consultations. I think that we can say objectively that they have reached out across the length and breadth of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They continue to engage with discrete stakeholder groups, and they continue to make the case nationally, an objective actuarial case for the reform of the National Insurance Service and our pension system. It's important to know and to recognize that the NIS is an integral partner in national development, that it plays a role in securing the future of Vincentians, working Vincentians, retired Vincentians, and it plays a critical ongoing current role in investing in social outreach and in partnering with all facets of society in leading our own, in meeting our own developmental aspirations. It's important to recognize as well that this NIS in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a well-managed organization. And we have to say it over and over again, that this NIS is a well-managed organization through Stuart's time and through the time of his predecessors. And repeated objective analyses by third parties have made the point that this NIS is a well-run, well-managed organization. We, however, recognize that from time to time, this is not the first time, and it likely will not be the last time. From time to time, demographic changes require adjustments to the NIS and pension schemes. There have been repeated instances in the past where we've had to adjust rates, where we've had to adjust retirement ages. And we look at the demographics, and these three people on this side down here, the actuaries, look at the data. How fast is your population growing? How many old people do you have? How long are they living? How many active working people are supporting each retiree with their contributions? What rate of return are we getting on our investments? And how can those investments offset the growing population of retired people and their needs? And they make the analyses and then make recommendations to us about when and how reforms should take place. And we are at another one of those inflection points, or at least we can see a decade from now that challenges would be on the horizon if we don't do anything to reform the NIS. We know that our pension plan is maturing. We know that there are more retirees in St. Vincent and the Grenadines today than there have been at any point in the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at least retirees being supported by pensions and national insurance. And we know that the balance has been slowly shifting from lots of active workers supporting a few retirees to a few active workers supporting many retirees. We know that the pension system that we've set up in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is relatively generous, and that the contributions that you put in, weighed against the benefits that you get, is fairly generous. And I think the ILO has made that observation, that this is a fairly generous system. And because of the generosity and because of the demographic changes, it is time for us to reassess what it takes to carry the NIS and to carry a stable, robust, and resilient pension system into future generations. As Lennox said, the NIS remains today and will remain after whatever reforms take place, will remain the best investment for working people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Because go where you want and tell somebody that you want to give them a single-digit contribution from your salary, and that when you retire, that single-digit contribution is going to get you 50-60% of your working wage. You're not going to find that investment anywhere outside of the NIS and the pension system. And if you find it somewhere else, it's probably too good to be true. And we recognize that based on regional and international comparisons, the sustainability of the NIS will be put into question if we continue this gap between the generosity of the payout and the small size of the pay-in by the worker. It's difficult to compare the NIS in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the NIS in Barbados or the NIS in St. Lucia or anything, because there are a number of different factors in place. You can talk about the type of benefits that NIS is pay out. It, for example, doesn't make the best sense to compare the Vincentian NIS to the Bajan NIS. Even I could stay here politically and say, our contribution is very small, and Barbados is 23%. So we are better than Barbados. But you get benefits in Barbados from their pension scheme that you don't get from our scheme. So it wouldn't be a fair comparison. And also, there are pension systems that have reformed more recently than we have. And it wouldn't be fair to say that Dominica or somebody else has a higher contribution rate than we do when they reformed more recently, and we'll soon catch up to them. So it's very hard to do an apples to apples comparison, but there are a few things that are true. Within the OECS, only Montserrat has a lower contribution rate than St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Only Montserrat. And within CARICOM, the range of contributions are wide, from 6% to almost 24%. And in that entire range in CARICOM, only Jamaica and the Bahamas have lower contribution rates. This is the independent states of CARICOM. Only Jamaica and the Bahamas have lower contribution rates than that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And if you look around the region, 11 of the 15 members of CARICOM already have a pension age between 65 and 67 years old. 11 of 15. According to our schedule, I don't think, Stuart, that we're supposed to reach the 65-year-old benchmark until about 2027. 2028, sorry. But already, 11 of 15 countries are there. And in some countries in the region, the coverage of the self-employed is mandatory, which means that the pot of contributors to the NIS is larger. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it is voluntary. And not only is it voluntary, it is very poorly taken up. Less than a quarter of the self-employed people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines actually pay in to the NIS, which makes the contribution base smaller. So with those realities, we have to say, what are we going to do to make sure that the NIS is solvent and sustainable well beyond the next decade? It's fine for the next decade. But it doesn't make sense for us to wait for a decade to elapse to then impose draconian reforms when we can, at this point, impose moderate and palatable reforms that will make the NIS sustainable for decades to come. And in Stuart's engagement with stakeholders and in light of the inputs that we've received from our actuarial reports, some suggestions have emerged. One is to increase the contribution rate from the current 10% to 15% over the next 10 years. Another one is to incentivize or increase by one mechanism or another the number of self-employed people who make NIS, who register for the NIS and make contributions. To consider options to reduce old age pension costs, going beyond 65 up to 67, maybe, at some point in the 2030s. Reducing the maximum old age pension replacement from 60% to 55%. Discouraging the number of people who are taking up early retirement. A lot of people have done the math now and realize that it makes a lot more sense to take early retirement. And it's very beneficial to a lot of people. And I'm sure the labor movement has done that analysis themselves. They may even be advising their membership that is a good deal. And we have to see about whether or not it's necessary to discourage that practice, because it does create an imbalance in what you put in versus what you take out and how long you take it out for. And we want to have discussions about harmonizing the NIS with the government pension, because currently it is at least technically possible between your NIS and your government pension to make more money in retirement than you did when you were working, up to 127% of your wages. Now, objectively, that is not sustainable. For non-working people to make more than working people are making, and to make more than they made when they were working. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been raising this issue repeatedly for the last decade and a half. In the 2008 address of the Prime Minister, who was then the Minister of Finance, he laid out the same case that I'm making now for pension reform and NIS reform. That was in 2008. It was 15 years ago. And repeatedly years after that, the same case was made. And there have been times when the parliamentary opposition echoed the calls for reform of the NIS and the pension system, particularly under the former leader of the parliamentary opposition, who had considerable experience in the field of pension and NIS reform. And we believe that after repeating it and raising it and saying that the time is coming, the time is coming, the time is coming, we believe that the time is now. We wanted to do it 2 years ago. And the labor movement will remember I had raised it with them, with this issue with them then. But we had the intervening challenge of COVID. And we didn't think that it was an opportune time to be reforming the NIS and to changing pension rates at the same time when the economy was contracting and people were losing their jobs, and we did not know the depth or the scope or the scale of the COVID contraction. But as soon as we began to emerge, we said we were going to put this important resilience issue back on the front burner. And here we are. In a statement to the Parliament back in July, I indicated to the public on behalf of the government that we wanted to consult with stakeholders. We wanted to have discussion and debate for 4 months from that date, that July date. That would take you July, August, September, October, November. And that at that point, with the public having heard from everybody here and from the NIS having heard from the public about what is feasible, what is palatable, what is manageable, what can garner consensus, at that point, we will synthesize our specific recommendations, present them again to the public at the end of the year, and put them in the budget for the new year, 2024. It is fair enough to say that those will include an increase in the retirement age. It is fair enough to say that it will include an increase in the contribution rate. It is fair enough to say that it will include ways to at least incentivize getting more self-employed people into the NIS. And it is fair to say that it will include ways in which we can harmonize the NIS benefits with the government pension benefits. What is going to take place over these months now is Stuart and distinguished panels like these presenting the case in an objective, apolitical manner for the need for reform and how the reform will, as they say, secure our future together. And then listening to you before we come forward and say what it is precisely that we think is manageable and palatable and feasible in all of the circumstances. You'll notice that Stuart Haynes and the NIS has been the face of this reform movement so far. I not only trust Stuart implicitly, but he knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. And I've wanted to make sure that all of the initial engagements with the public have not had a political face. That they have been objective, that they have been based on hard facts actuarial facts, and that they have not been based on what color you support. Because NIS reform and pension reform is bigger than politics. And whichever party is in power is going to have to deal with the demographics and the reality of securing the retirement and future of Vincentians. The time will come, I'm sure, for a more robust engagement. The time will come to answer those who say that the government has been dipping its hand into the NIS. The prudential benchmark for exposure to the government is 20%. 20% of the NIS's resources. This government, at the time of the last actuarial study, was at 13%, below the prudential benchmark. And today is at 11%, even further below the prudential benchmark. This is not a government that treats the NIS as a piggy bank. But also, this is not the time for that political discussion. This is a time for the facts to be laid out and the case to be made by objective professionals. And I hope that we all recognize the critical importance of a sound and functioning and sustainable NIS and pension program for the resilience of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That's what we're talking about here. Resilience is a cornerstone of development, and one of the critical elements of that resilience building is a sound, well-run, sustainable pension program. I hope that we'll benefit from a informative, educational discussion today. I hope that there will be a time for the panelists to respond to any questions and comments that may come from the audience. And I hope that we can treat this subject with the seriousness and the maturity that it demands. NIS reform is, well, Social Security reform is taking place across the world. It's taking place next door in Barbados. And we've heard the facts there and the circumstances are different from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But the debate is ongoing. It's taking place in France. It's taking place in Senegal. It's taking place in Grenada. And the data shows that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is one of 10 other countries in this Caribbean region that will have to have this conversation within the next decade. They may push it, some may push it off a year or two based on whatever considerations they may have. But the demographic realities facing St. Vincent and the Grenadines are facing every other Caribbean country. More retirees, fewer contributors supporting more retirees. That's a reality that every single country is facing in the Caribbean because of its demographic realities. And we believe that it's better to bell the cat now than to wait till the 11th hour to have this conversation. Your inputs are absolutely critical. The precise contours of this reform package that we will present at the beginning of the budget year 2024 have not been solidified. I've told you the general areas that we want to pursue. But your input, your questions, your comments, your own experiences are very critical to shaping the ultimate package that we will take to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I want to thank Stuart and his team again for organizing this and future events. And I want to thank you in advance for the seriousness and the maturity with which you have taken the time to come here tonight and to listen to the presentations that you'll hear throughout today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Gonsalves. Before we move into our panel discussion this evening, we will just take a quick 5-minute break and we'll have a musical interlude by Mr. Jamora Francis. Thank you. Our panel discussion will look at 4 key areas. The moderator for the discussion is Mrs. Joanna Burgess. Mrs. Burgess is a national of Portugal and Cape Verde who joined the ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean in November 2022 as Specialist Social Protection and Occupational Safety and Health. Mrs. Burgess joined the ILO in 2012 as Manager and Coordinator of Technical Cooperation Projects, which supported the promotion and strengthening of social protection systems and decent work in African Portuguese-speaking countries. Later, in 2020 to 2022, she served as Social Protection Specialist for Central Africa, covering 9 countries. Prior to joining the ILO, she worked 7 years for the Ministry of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security of Portugal. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Borges.
Well, I have hope this can get me. I have a problem of size with this. Honorable Camilo Gonçalves, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology with responsibility for Social Security, Ministry of Honorable Curtis King, apologies, Ministry of Education, other members of Cabinet, other members of Parliament, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor for the ECCB, Mr. Lennox Bowman, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the NIS, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, other members of the Board of Directors of the NIS, Mr. Stuart Haynes, Director of the NIS, fellow panelists, other specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to welcome you to this important session focused on one of the most critical topics of our times, pension reforms. As we gather here today, we find ourselves at a crossroads, facing the challenges and opportunities that come with evolving demographic landscapes, economic fluctuations, and changing social dynamics. Pensions, as a cornerstone of social security systems, hold the key to ensuring the well-being and dignity of our aging population. With longer life expectancies and shifting workforce patterns, it has become imperative to examine, adapt, and innovate our pension systems to guarantee sustainable financial security for retirees, while maintaining the equilibrium of public finances. Over the course of this session, we will navigate into the intricate web of pension reforms, exploring strategies that balance the interest of both current and future generations. We will consider the pressing questions surrounding retirement ages, contribution rates, investment strategies, governance, to name a few. Through an open dialogue and shared learning, we hope to move closer to a more equitable and resilient pension system for all, inspire productive discussions, and setting the stage for informed decision-making that will resonate beyond this session. We are privileged today to have a distinguished panel of experts who will share their insights and propose actionable solutions to all of these challenges that have already even been mentioned throughout our event today. I'm confident that the collective expertise and interest present here today will pave the way for a deeper understanding of pension reform and their implications, particularly here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So without further ado, let me present you our panelists. As you can imagine, each one of them has been chosen not just for their credentials, but also for their ability to contribute meaningfully to our discussions on pension reforms. In this sense, I would start to invite Mr. Derek Osborne, who is a partner and senior actuary in the international practice of TELUS Health, to take the floor. With nearly 30 years of experience in Social Security and pensions in the Caribbean, Mr. Osborne provides a wide range of policy, actuarial, and operational advice to Social Security funds, institutions, government, and public sector entities. Mr. Osborne, the floor is yours.
Honorable Camilo Gonzalez, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology, and also responsible for the NIS, Social Security, Minister of Health, other members of Parliament, Dr. Valda Henry, colleague panelists, ECCB Deputy Governor, Mr. Lennox Bowman, Chairman of the NIS Board, other members of the board who are present tonight, Mr. Stuart Haynes, Director, and fellow panelists, other special invited guests, good evening. It's really, really good to be here with you tonight, and I want to thank the NIS for the invitation. And I've been told I'm always the bearer of bad news as the actuary who's done these projections a couple of times. But I'm glad to inform you that we do have some options, right? It's not all doom and gloom. Other people have gone before us, and they've found solutions to solve their challenges. I want to start off with a little picture, and the minister painted a very good picture already of changes that you've seen and what's happening around the world and around the region. And what we show here is a little history 20 years ago where we were and where we are now with a few numbers and a few charts. As we see, the number of contributors has not really grown very much, 34,000, now 42,000. But look at pensioners, almost 3 times as much, 3,500 to almost 9,000. So every month, twice a month, almost 9,000 people get money in their account like clockwork from the NIS, making a big difference in their lives. You see below $85 million was paid out last year in benefits compared to only 11 million 20 years ago, right? Things are changing. We see that the gap between the contribution rate and the expenditure rate that was positive 20 years ago, 1.2%, is now negative 3.3%. So we're taking in 10% on average in contributions. We're paying out 13.3 in benefits. And as you all know, in your own house, even if you have savings, if you spend more than you take in, eventually your savings will be dried up. We see that the size of the reserve relative to expenses, which is the reserve expenditure ratio, used to be 17, now it's less than 5. So there's essentially 5 years left of money in the fund if we had no contribution income. The little pictures below show that there used to be a lot of people putting in for every one taken out, and now there are fewer people putting in for every one taken out. And the same thing applies to your family. If you have plenty of children, it's not difficult to take care of mommy and daddy. If you only have 2 children, it's more difficult. On the right-hand side, we see a picture with the contribution rate that has been adjusted several times. It's now at 10%. But we see the green line, which is the expenditure, increasing significantly over time, showing that gap I spoke about earlier of the 3.3%. And then on the bottom chart is the reserve ratio, which essentially says how big the fund is relative to expenditure, and is decreasing significantly over time. Nothing here is alarming or strange to me, because this is a pattern we see all over the region. The concern is the growing gap between expenditure and contributions, and this reserve falling so quickly, approaching 0. So what is the goal of the reforms that the minister spoke about that we're here to discuss tonight? So these 2 charts are taken from the last actuarial review. The one on the left shows the reserves, just under 500 million 3 years ago, and we see that the projected deficit depletion is 2034. So the first goal of reforms is to push that line to the right. On the right-hand side, we see a curve that says the cost of the system, the pay-as-you-go rate, which is increasing upward of 30% down the road. The goal is to bring that down. So it's closer between the contribution rate and the expenditure rate. So if we think about pensions and we think about the NIS and what we're trying to do, yes, we want to pay benefits that are meaningful, that allow people to live a reasonable standard of living. But we also want our workers and employers to be able to afford that contribution. If you think about it, you want to pay less, but you still want a big benefit. Those two are competing priorities. We also need to ensure that our children and grandchildren are not going to pay 25% for what many of you paid 10 or less % for. That's not fair to our generations to come. So we have to find that balance. We have to find that sweet spot between what we promise in benefits, what we're going to charge in contributions, and ensuring that we are sustainable for generations to come. So we talk about St. Vincent and Grenadines, we talk about the region, we talk about the world. And if we look at our systems around the OECS and I'll broaden the Caribbean as well, these are the main challenges that we faced over, in your case, 36 years, in some cases, over 50 years. The NIS started in the late 60s in some cases. As we've heard today, demographics, right? We're having fewer children, and yes, we are living longer. I'm going to show you a chart which hopefully surprises you as to how many people actually do make it to 80 and 85 and so forth. Expenditure, as we've seen, as I just showed you, is already more than income, right? And similar to our household budgets, that can't go on forever. We do have generous pensions. The promise initially when the ILO came in the 60s and 70s was to replace 60% for a career worker. Right? Contribution rates were initially very low, and therefore the promise was inconsistent with the initial contribution. So we have to find that balance between the level of the promise with how much we're willing to pay for that promise. And we also have to not forget that other sources of income in old age may also be necessary, like a pension plan as a public servant or private sector worker. We have to find a way to encourage pension plans in the private sector, and also find a way to encourage our people to save, right? To save for that rainy day, but we also want to save for our pensions when we get older. Contribution rate I mentioned already being quite low. The investment horizon has changed. 10, 15, 20 years ago, deposit rates were 5, 6%. Governments were lending money at 7, 8%. But times have changed. And so the interest rate environment is now lower, and the returns we are seeing, not only here, but across the region, are also much lower. Self-employed person, that's a big challenge. And this is nothing to do with sustainability or the fund. This is really about them being able to live when they get old. If you think about life today, more and more people are becoming self-employed, both informal, or just formal, right? But what we see is that they're not contributing to the NIS. And when you only have one child and no children, or even two children, and you get old, you're going to become a dependent either of those children, or your neighbors, or the breadfruit tree, or the state. So we have to find a way to get them in. And technology allows us new ways to get people into the system. And finally, reform's been delayed. You did reforms 10 years ago. We're back here again. Grenada is doing it for the very first time the last few months, even though they had the advice to do it many, many years ago. And so, just for information, in Grenada, their 65 is going to be achieved the same year as you, even though they're only starting next January. So they're going 1 year every year. You went 1 year every 3 years, right? But for them, they waited long, and therefore they're going to have to feel that bit of medicine more harshly than the people here in St. Vincent and Grenadines did. So here's that chart about how long are Vincentians living. So we look at the numbers from NIS data, and at the bottom, this is how many years since pension started. And all of these people began at 60, right? Before 10 years ago, everyone began at 60. 84% are living to 70. 71% to 75. More than half reach 80, right? Our older people aren't dropping down dead every morning, right? Yes, as we get older, the people who we know become more of dying age, who we grew up with as aunts and uncles in the village. And that's why we may think people are dying faster. But in truth and in fact, NIS pensioners are living quite long. Right? We see here even 30 years, it's a small group, but 18% have reached 90 years old. So we are living longer. In terms of the options that we have, and so, we talk about even our own family homes. If you're spending more than you take in, there are two things you can do. You either earn more or you spend less. There's two things you can do. For the NIS, it's no different. And so on the left-hand side here, we have the options for increasing revenue. The obvious one is contribution income, contribution rate. Compliance is another option. I've checked the numbers, and compliance is actually quite good. Right? And I was pleasantly surprised to see that most of the employers in St. Vincent and Grenadines, especially the big ones, are paying 12 months every year. The smaller ones, they're challenged probably, and sometimes they duck and they dodge. And so those are the ones who are less compliant, and I guess more work for compliance officers to do, but it's not a big bunch of money that's sitting out there not coming in every month. Investment returns is the third option in terms of getting more money into the fund. As I said a while ago, investment interest rates have come down, generally speaking, and so the diversification that the board has taken on, we heard the lower proportion in government, which is good. I'll tell you, I'm from Montserrat originally, right? And you think about Montserrat and the volcano that was there, has been there for 27 years, half of the island was wiped out, essentially, right? Fortunately, only a small portion of the assets were invested locally. Similarly, we have Barbados, who in 2018 had debt restructuring. A lot of their money was in government debt, and therefore the NIS there lost over $1 billion of their $5 billion portfolio, right? So having all your eggs basket is not safe, and that's why the NIS fund today is actually very well diversified. And sometimes, or I say all the time, accepting a lower rate of return for diversification's sake may be well worth it, because we're in hurricane zone. You all have volcanoes as well here, right? You never know what could happen down the road. On the expense side, we have essentially 4 options to reduce long-term cost. What we have here is increasing how long it takes to qualify. You're already going to 15 years. I don't see much room there to go any higher than 15 years. You can start pensions later, which is the age going to 65, or probably 66. Barbados announced just last week, 2 weeks ago, it's going to be 67 and a half, well, it's 67 and a half for the last 10 years, 67 and a half in 2028, and 68 in 2034. So people have time to plan now for that extra year of work should it affect them. We also have possibility of making this average new pension slightly smaller. So we mentioned generous pensions. Right now it's very front-loaded to short service. And therefore people who work 12, 15 years get a big chunk of their maximum pension in the very early years of their contributions. And finally, pension adjustments, which every now and again the government awards pension increases. We have to look at that. And maybe the pensioners have to share in the burden of saving NIS by not getting as frequent pension adjustments as happened in the past. In terms of around the region, just a quick highlights here, and the minister covered some of them already. In all the OECS countries, expenditure already exceeds income, all. In all but 2, expenditure does not yet exceed all income. Fund depletion, you aren't alone. 10 years, within 10 years, some funds will be depleted. Only St. Kitts and Nevis has not done reforms yet. Grenada, well, they passed a bill just a couple of weeks ago, so they're in that category now, reform, but they haven't started to take effect yet. And Grenada, in their reforms in the last few months, have added a new benefit for unemployment. As we all know, COVID hit us a slap, and many governments chose to implement some temporary support, income support for workers. I want to show you quickly here the contribution rates across the OECS on the left. And Minister Montserrat has increased to 12% since the report was written.
That was corrected,
corrected, right? I'm going to 15, right? Dominica going to 15.75. Antigua going to 16. Grenada going to 16 as well, right? So you are now at the bottom of the pack in terms of 10%, same as Anguilla and St. Lucia. And I'll tell you, St. Lucia is still looking pretty because they made their reforms over 15 years ago, right? They acted early, and therefore their fund is still much stronger today. On the right-hand side, we see pension ages. Pretty much, most people moving to 65. Antigua will be there in 2 years' time. Grenada, as I said, going there very quickly. And then you're going there in 2028. Montserrat, an extreme reform they did last year to totally eliminate the early age pension. People taking it too much, and they had to do something, and therefore there are no new pensioners for the next 4.5 years in Montserrat because they've gotten rid of the early age pension. So people who weren't 60 on April 1st last year have to wait till their 65th birthday to qualify. That's how drastic things have become in certain areas. Sad story, and I won't dwell here, and it's really sad to share this with you, but it's a true story. We never want to get there. Antigua and Barbuda has had problems with their cash flow for years. They were late paying pensions many times. But the worst situation was a man, elderly man, went to the bank, didn't get his pension, but he was hungry. And he chose to take some stuff from the grocery store that he didn't pay for. He was caught. He went to court. He explained the situation. Ma'am, I'm female magistrate. Ma'am, I'm hungry. I was hungry. There was no money. They couldn't tell me when. I was wrong. I'm sorry. She gave him a slap on the wrist, let him go. Don't do it again. Right? We never want to get there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Not even close. There should be no doubt that there's enough cash in the bank, enough reserves to pay your pensions next month and the month after. So how do we ensure that we have enough money in the bank and in reserves to get there? And these are 4 ingredients I like to always talk about because I think it's very important. The first one is the economy. The economy is critical. Workers are the contributing factor to the fund. So having more people working for higher wages is the number 1 ingredient. Making St. Vincent and Grenadines more attractive to investors internationally and locally, right? Demand more workers, people come in, you demand higher wages. Number 2 is a design of a system that suits the times today. Unfortunately, 55 years ago, the ILO came to the region, gave us these systems, and we really haven't thought differently since then. Times have changed, but our schemes look very much the same today as they did 55 years ago, even though life has changed significantly. As a Caribbean people, we need to do better and see how we can tweak, maybe not tweak, maybe reform in a wholesale way, how we do what we do to ensure it suits the times. Number 3 is administration being effective and efficient. Compliance, service, ensuring that people self-employed do pay. And everybody who's employed gets their contributions in, it's online to check and so forth and so on. And most importantly, Mr. Minister, and I really want to stress this one, it is about time that any employer in St. Vincent and Grenadines who conducts business is NIS compliant. If they're not compliant, they should not get a renewal of a business license, right? As Caribbean people, we know when we migrate, we fall in line fast. We know how to follow the law in New York and London. We know how to, put on seatbelt and don't litter. Let's do it at home, right? Let's do the right thing at home to make our place stronger. And finally, good governance, right? I like to say honest and responsible governance, right? At all levels, Prime Minister, Minister, Board, Cabinet, everybody, right? And what that means, it means taking those tough decisions when it's time to do that. Don't push the can down the road. And I know that it's tough because people are hurting today, and yet we want to fix 30 years from now. That's a very, very tough choice, but it needs to be done. I'm wrapping up. So just in terms of enhancing social protection, we really believe there are 2 things that maybe need to be looked at. 1, unemployment benefit. As we said earlier, it was done during COVID across the region. Some people hit with hurricanes have done it as well, temporarily, to be looked at. And then self-employed. The other day, and this is my last slide, in terms of self-employed, technology allows us now to do things differently. And we can find a way with no forms, no due dates, no penalties. So your target is $2,000 for the year. That's in your head based on your earnings. You could pay all on January morning or pay all December 31st. Or you could pay every month, every week as your money comes in. People who are self-employed don't work like employed people do. They have some good months, they have some bad months. The fisherman can't come to the office here between 8 and 4 when they're open to bring his money. He had a good day, he go home, tell the wife put the money in his account, and the money goes to NIS, and so on. Let's find a way to use technology to make it work. A final point, we're not in crisis, right? There's no crisis yet. We don't want to get there, right? And I firmly believe that we can find a Vinci solution for this Vinci problem. There's opportunities out there, as we heard, on the income side and on the expenditure side. So let's put our hands together, our heads together, our hearts together, and let's find a way to find that Vinci solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will, if you don't mind, I will stay seated to allow other panelists to go, attempt to do the presentation. So, well, but let me thank you, Mr. Horstman, for this very enlightening presentation and to bringing us the importance of embracing the pension reform into our discussions and what we need to secure it and how can we build a future together. So next, please join me to welcome Ms. Valda Henry. Ms. Henry is the Deputy Governor for the ECCB, and she has also served as a Senior Investment Officer at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and has played instrumental roles in different management areas and institutions. Ms. Henry, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure being back in St. Vincent. So, Honorable Camilo Gonzalez, the Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology with responsibility for Social Security, as well as the Chairman of the Monetary Council of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, so he's my boss. Mr. Curtis King, the Minister of Education, other members of Cabinet, members of Parliament, Mr. Lennox Bowman, the Chairman of the NIS, other members of the board, Mr. Stuart Haynes, the Executive Director, all of the management and staff of the NIS, as well as present and past, my fellow panelists, all specially invited guests, the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This evening, my presentation is on sound risk management, a critical success factor in pension reform, ERP. I really need a clock to watch. They have warned me so many times I must stay within my 15 minutes. I intended to bring my phone to have it right here, but I forgot it, so that means I shouldn't worry about the time. I'm just joking. So the outline of the presentation this evening, what are some of the elements of risk management, pension reform deemed to be as part of the strategic focus of the institution, what is the interplay between the risk and performance? And just a brief look at the reforms in the ECCU region. I just briefly, because Derek gave us a really good presentation on that. So what is risk management, one may ask? And it is, I have coined it from my years of experience, is the systems and processes to manage risk, protect resources, and ensure the long-term sustainability and viability of an organization. Those last few words there are an important part, long-term sustainability and viability. And as we speak about pension reform, it is really to ensure that long-term sustainability so that in perpetuity there will be Social Security. I want to say very early that the Social Security, we are at this stage and this juncture because the design of Social Security systems in St. Vincent and our OECS were never meant to be fully funded. They were pay as you go. And what that means is that at some point, these reforms need to take place. Increasing contribution rate, we look again at the benefits and all of that. Over the years, you would realize in a lot of our countries, while the actuary would be making his recommendations about, yes, increasing benefits, he would also make recommendations about increasing the contributions, because he would have recognized that this system was established for that. But in many of our countries, our governments increase the benefits, which all of us were happy for, without increasing the contribution, and you realize what would happen with that. A lopsided. That scale would not balance. Now is the time to right that scale. And that's part of why we are here, and we will look at how risk management is a critical component of that. And we know what is risk, uncertainty. If we knew for certainty what was going to happen, there would be no risk at all. We'd all take the decisions that would ensure success for us. And the risk management process is critical, and then I'll show you the slide a little earlier that shows that risk and strategy are intertwined. You cannot speak about strategy without talking about risk. And the pension reform is one of the strategic focus of the NIS. It's not just in isolation. It is a strategic choice to ensure the sustainability of NIS, to ensure, as the minister told us, about the resilience of the system, and which will then lead to the resilience of the nation to deal with various shocks. Because that's the whole reason why Social Security was established. It was to deal with shocks. Shocks of old age, shocks of sickness, shocks of maternity, shocks of, death. It's all of those things. It's really shocks. We call it risk, but it's really shocks. And some persons are more able than others to withstand the shocks. And that is part of the reason for the establishment of Social Security in our region, because we recognize, and the governments of the day recognize, that many persons on their own were not able to withstand those shocks. And that is the reason for our Social Security. And we talk about enterprise risk management. How then do we convert risk into NIS and make it part and parcel of everything that happens at NIS? It's to recognize that risk is everybody's business. NIS, I know, has a chief risk officer. There is an actuary, but risk is not just for these two people. It is for everyone in the institution, of course, headed by the director. And we saw the risk areas in all kinds of areas, all areas: governance, compliance, internal control, even risk itself, the management, performance management, strategic planning. And one of the things, in fact, as we move forward in this pension reform, a critical question that NIS has to ask is, what are the risks involved in these reforms? And how then do we mitigate the risk? Because the pension reform is not just to ensure the sustainability only of the NIS, but it's a balancing act between ensuring that the rights and the protection of the workers, the protection of the contributors, and more importantly, the protection of the pensioners. Because we know that Social Security is the key pillar of income in retirement across our region. We know, I think it's the minister or the chairman who mentioned that, in terms of, Derek gave a good example, where sadly, a pensioner found himself, can you imagine at 80 years to be arrested for stealing? I mean, that's a disgrace. But what does it say? And his excuse, the pension was late. We don't want to get there in any other country. That's one incident too many. And when I was doing my research many moons ago, actually, 1990, 2000, gosh, it feels like it's so long ago. 2000, yes. One of the things that I actually have it in my book, in speaking, I went, speaking to many persons. And one of the refrain that the pensioners, especially the older pensioners, would, a constant, that is why I had to repeat it, was that they know with certainty that their pension would be paid. That they can put on their pot, come into town. In those days, there was no direct payment and all of that. Come into town collect their cash from NIS office, head to the supermarket, and get back down to cook. We cannot afford to lose that. We cannot afford to make our older citizens so vulnerable that in old age they find themselves acting in ways they never dreamed of. And I'm sure they cautioned the children against. And so I like the key types of risk we have to look about, or is right here, about 7 of them: reputation, company, environment, finance, liquidity, and strategic. NIS has an enterprise risk management policy. So out of that policy, I have siphoned off some of this risk and put them in the key categories of risk. What are some of the reputational risk NIS has? One is in terms of delay or inability to meet its financial obligation. That is one of the biggest risks, because once that happens, what happens? NIS is about confidence. Social Security cannot survive if we are not confident in its ability to deliver. Social Security, because compliance, lack of compliance, if you really go back down and you speak to people who are not complying, okay, minus those who are really just deliberate, or who want to help to collude and evade, is because they don't have confidence that they'll have a pension. So what do they say? Let me hold that on my own. Let me take care of that risk. But of course, we know what happens with that. So that confidence is critical in ensuring that persons contribute freely, willingly to Social Security. Fraud, poor governance, all of those things are tied in with that one little word, confidence. And we all know about the whole elements of good governance, transparency, accountability, and all of that good stuff. And this exercise and the other exercise in terms of education and PR is part of transparency. And I often say to persons that when you make yourself so transparent, you have to also be prepared to perform, to hold yourself accountable. Because accountability is also what drives performance. So you have given persons information, and when they call and ask questions, you must happily answer them rather than try to not answer and, dodge the issue. What are the company risk? It's again on the design of the system. I've told you already the system was designed as pay as you go. In itself has its risk. And Derek showed this beautiful graph that showed, I borrowed one of his, that showed in terms of the growth of benefits, the reduction in the increase in the system dependency, so we have less workers to pay pensions and so on. So is the benefit expenditure. And as the system matures, the benefit will increase. You will also see, and I think Derek, the one I borrowed has it, you will see the drastic increase in the benefits from the 2002 to 2022, something like 623%. I have told Derek, and I'm saying it so that he really does it for the future ones, that he has to add 2 other rows in that table. One on contribution, so you can see where contribution has gone, and do the interplay yourself between the contributions and the benefits, and the other on the reserves, because it's the reserves that also speak about the sustainability of the fund. The financial risk, the objective, the investment, and of course the operational risk. How they do things here in terms of their HR practices, governance practices, compliance, IT, all of those things can lead to risk. Then environmental risk, we have the market risk. I had to add economic risk here and political risk. And the minister, boldly stated that the government, allows Social Security. They don't see Social Security as a piggy bank. I think I took that as a note. They don't. And he showed the decline in terms of government investments from Social Security from 13% in the last actual report to 11%, and maybe for you to decrease a little further. But while I say that, I want to also say, because I strongly hold that view, that because Social Security is the largest mobilizer of savings in our economies, Social Security has a role to play in economic development. It must. Because if this is the institution that brings in much more income than even our banks, how then does it sit aside and do nothing. But your own Dr. Wendell Lawrence, Samuel, many years ago, in fact, one of the persons who wrote very early on Social Security, what he argued and he advised to governments at the time is that the Social Security Fund should not be used for recurrent expenditure, but should be used for capital investment, which will grow the economy. And studies continue to demonstrate the importance of Social Security investment in the capital development, which will then lead to the economic development. We cannot, it doesn't matter which government is in office, we cannot exclude that. It is critical. And I have a whole chapter on that in my book. Finance risk, liquidity risk, again, the cash flow. When I went to UE, in my first class in financial accounting, Dr. Robert in Chatterton was our lecturer. Betty, you should remember that. Betty's Alma. And she stood up in the class after she said her good morning, and if she said, cash is king. And everybody was like, what? I mean, you come looking for accounting debits credit. And she repeated it. Cash is king. I tell you, over all these many years, I've learned to appreciate that statement. Because you can have all of the assets in this world, all of the wealth in this world. If you don't have cash, it is going to be difficult for you to make certain decisions. So even if St. Vincent is selling for $1 and you don't have that $1, even if you own 90% of St. Vincent, what happens? Why? Because sometimes you cannot convert the physical asset you have into liquidity. And so an institution, just like us as individuals, must always ensure it has adequate cash flow to meet its needs. Credit risk. Again, if risk that person's, and in the case of Social Security, it's about compliance. It's about the persons who owe the employers, that they pay their funds, that they have the ability to pay. Because ultimately that is also important for the sustainability of the Social Security and of course other parties that we may use. Okay, it's right here, cash flow, I have it there said. And then of course governance risk, you see political risk come back in as a strategic, because ultimately Social Security is governed by an act. And in the act, what is it? Who is the head of it is the minister responsible for Social Security. Then, of course, there's a board, but in terms of the interplay. And I was saying to the board this morning, because we had a little discussion, a very nice, vibrant discussion, if I may say so, that at the end of the day, you know, in the Caribbean, we always speak about, the boards are, government boards, they're like lackeys to the government because it's the government who appoints them and so on. Folks, I am here to tell you, it is not about how the board gets appointed that is the critical factor. That's important, but it is not the critical factor in the performance of Social Security institutions or any institution. It is the who. Who sits on the board? Because there can be no good governance if they are not men and women of integrity. And that is the deciding factor. It's not the how. So don't, I know sometimes the workers, because, the trade unions, they agitate a lot on that, about the, how. It's not the how. Agitate further on the who. I was chair of the Dominican Social Security Board a few years back. And when our board term came to an end and, the board to renew, I went to the minister and I said to him, I cannot tell you who to put. I will not tell you who you should appoint on this board. I'd be totally out of place to do that. But what I can tell you is who I need on this board. What are the skills and competencies that the Dominican Social Security needs to ensure its sustainability? And you may choose anyone you want. Because in every party and all supporters, they're competent people. Ensure competence, persons of integrity. And I must say, I always said I had one of the best boards ever. And on that board, it was a wide range of persons. There were 2 members who people were shocked when they were nominated. Why? Because they were heavy opposition persons. But there were 2 such members. And I tell you, that board worked like a dream. It's the people. Yeah. I have 2 minutes? 5? Okay, so I have 5 minutes, so I'm coming down. So how does risk and pension reform? I said that to you, about it being a strategy and it intertwined. I told you that already, so I'm moving swiftly. And I just wanted to put that little graphical stuff. Derek, we're going to change it into an easy coin. Yeah. That the strategy and risk are together. You know, we have a coin, you know. A coin has a what? A head and a tail. Without the head, that coin is not legal tender. You can't use it. Well, it's the same thing with strategy and risk. You cannot speak strategy if you're not speaking risk. And if you look at some of the scandals we've had across the world, but even in our own little Caribbean region, and I'm not calling any names here tonight because I'll get off track and then big story. So when you look at some of the scandals that have happened across the world and in our own region, because we have two ones facing us very glaringly, it's because persons focus so much on strategy, increasing income by 100%, doing this, again, without asking the question that was attendant. What are the risks involved to doing so? And can we afford that risk? Are we willing to take that risk? And it comes back down to, so moving right along, I'll come back to that again. It comes back, it comes back, let me stick to right here, on those 4-5 parameters that when we speak about risk, we need to pay attention to. What is the appetite of the institution for risk? Is it a low appetite? Is it medium, and is it assertive? Assertive says it changes. Depending on the situation, we're going to be risk averse, and depending on the situation, we're going to be risk takers. I will show you the other slide where I think NIS is in all of this profile. What is our profile? In terms of our risk, if I ask, and the director, I'm sure he has that available, in terms of his investment portfolio, he can give you a breakdown of what is in the short term, medium term, long term. What is high interest earning, not so high interest earning, what is more susceptible to changes in the interest rates, and so on and so forth. What is our capacity to absorb risk? How much can we take? In a simple little layman language, how much can you lose without coming to your knees? For some of us, it's $100. For some, it's maybe 100,000. For some, it's $1 million. But it's the capacity. Then what is our attitude? Because some people, they don't have the capacity, but nobody not bigger risk takers than they are. Or they just, they are. And again, they maybe go on the limb. What is there to lose? Nothing. 0 from 0 is 0, so let me take a gamble. You understand? But of course, the Social Security can't do that. And then what is our tolerance? Our tolerance is how much are we willing to take. And yes, it's supposed to be tied to capacity, but sometimes it isn't. In the sense that I may have the capacity to lose $1,000, but I don't want to lose more than $100. So my capacity may be 1,000, but my tolerance is 100. So I'm not going to take any decision that's going to compromise this $100 and make me lose 1,000. No. Some people, their capacity is $100, but their tolerance is 1,000. And we see that interplay. I'm sure you can think of even instances in your life when you kind of chewed more than you could really eat, and vice versa, or others. I am guilty here. So how do we fit the piece into NIS? Risk appetite, I said, is assertive. Its risk profile is a mix because you have a whole thing of the short term. Its risk capacity is going to be dependent on several of the factors, and the actuary is really good at that, and he's put out all of those things. Again, the risk attitude, I think, is missed in some areas. They are risk takers, but right now with that pension reform, they are risk averse. Why? Because they do not want at any point in 2034, which is what is anticipated, that if nothing changes, 2034 NIS has zeroed money, can't do anything. They don't want that to happen. So what are they doing now? 12 years ahead of time, they're saying, let us begin that conversation. And next year, 2024, 10 years going forward, let us take the actions that we need to take. Folks, from my own experience, because as the chair of the DSS, we undertook that reform. It's painful, but it's absolutely necessary. And what is important is the education and the sensitization to persons. In Dominica, we ran that for a whole year before we implemented the first one. We went to every nook and cranny of Dominica. We met every groups of persons you could think of. Some places we went back more than once and twice. We actually went back to the actuary, and Derek was the actuary on that project. Because initially, Derek, you remember, we had no provision for early retirement. But we had to go back and ask Derek to give us a costing. Because when we went to the port workers in particular, they were adamant that they could not go beyond 60. They've been doing this hard work for a long time, and they just could not think of going beyond 60. And that provision was placed. Interestingly, not many of them have taken it, because they listen, our own, the cut is significant. So, I mean, if you still have health and strength, you persevere. So we at Dominica is 65. We did that over about 10 years, so it's now 65 years. And then, of course, I explained that too. I borrowed Derek graph because that was to show you in terms of the appetite and the capacity. And we said Social Security reforms isn't new. That graph, you must have seen that already, some of you, because when the governor did country outreach last year in St. Vincent, that graph was placed. We did a little updating. And if you will notice, well, Antigua, Derek showed you, the graph showed that Antigua is ready. That just showed the dire state in which ABS, Antigua Social Security is. But they have started their reform program to bring themselves back. So where it says they have no reserve, that's not so anymore. They do have some reserves. So they still have cash flow issues, but they do still have some reserves, and you can see that graph. And again, the parametric reforms, and you saw the percentages, but yes, Grenada is at 12%, but it's moving. They're at 60, but they're moving, because Grenada is in their throes of the pension reform conversation. Like here, by next year, we should see the changes. And of course, there are some challenges as we go along, acceptance by the board, but fortunately that challenge isn't there, because the board has accepted, and the minister, interestingly, the political will is there. Because oftentimes it's the political will, you know, why these things are not taking place, because, you know, so many things. So we have dealt with some of the challenges here. Right resources, right approach. And NIS, St. Vincent, as part of their risk management policy, they have a three-pronged approach to that. Is their governing body, the management, and the internal audit, to ensure that the risk parameters are measured. And even in terms of their day-to-day decisions, not just about pension reform, but the day-to-day decisions at the NIS is governed within this framework. And so I say to you, the case for pension reform is there, not just as in terms as a strategy, but it is also part, as I call it, one of the bedrocks of the risk management strategy and the future sustainability of the NIS. And, oh, that's a repeat. Move. And here I come to the end. I just give you my bibliography here. I have to acknowledge ECSC for these pretty graphics that you saw, and Derek for lending me one of his slides, and I thank you. Joanna, how did I do on that 15 minutes? Thank you.
So, oops, just moving on. And thank you, Ms. Henry, grateful for taking us through the roads of risk management and showcase its importance when developing our strategies and as a critical component when we're talking and discussing about pension reforms. Apologies. What am I doing? Oh, sorry. Just writing things. To continue with our tonight's endeavor, I would like to ask Mr. Stuart Haynes to come next. So Mr. Haynes, as you all know, currently serves as the Executive Director of the St. Vincent and Grenadines NIS, a position that he held since February 2017. Among other responsibilities, he also serves as the focal point for the International Social Security Association, also known as ISA, in the English-speaking country Caribbean, representing the social security institutions in this region. Mr. Haynes.
All right, thank you, Joanna. Honorable Camelo Gonsalves, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning, and Technology with the responsibility of Social Security. Honorable Minister of Education, Curtis King, MP Major Leacock, MP Dwight Fitzgerald Bramble, other members of Parliament, Dr. Valder Henry, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Lennox Bowman, Chairman of National Insurance Board, and other members of the board. Also, other past executive members of the National Insurance Services, Dr. Minerva Glasgow and Mr. Lennox Tim, also management of NIS, the CRO is here, the Chief Risk Officer and the Manager of Communication, fellow panelists, other specially invited guests, and I'm only seeing shareholders here because at the end of the day, the pensioners and the contributors are shareholders of NIS. I will be taking you through the governance and the investment management framework of Social Security, focus on the OECS. As Derek mentioned, Social Security has a hybrid funding. The workers contribute and employers. That's the contribution piece. But also that is complemented by investment. And hence, we have this role on the investment side. The focus will be on the OECS. The system, by and large, are broadly similar from the standpoint of legislative, governance, and operation. We'll go right into the governance framework. The investment management pillars comprise the investment policy statement, a formal document that basically provides a roadmap of how we invest the monies. Critical to that is the risk tolerance, as Dr. Henry spoke, the willingness and ability to take risks. But also, if you invest in, you should have some target, some objective, because we must be heading towards somewhere. That's called the investment objective. And we need to know where we're going to put our monies. Are they going to be in deposits? Are they going to be in loans? Are they going to be in bonds? Are they going to be in real estate? Or are they going to be in equities? Then importantly, we have to implement the investment policy statement. However, the pillars have some guiding principles. First, the NIS Act confer powers to the minister, the board, the investment committee, and the director. Then the investment beliefs through all investment policy statement through the OECS. We have beliefs. We focus on the safety of funds, capital preservation. We also focus on liquidity because we want the cash to pay our bill when they fall due, which is benefit. Importantly also is yield because you want to strengthen your financial sustainability. Also social and economic utility. That's why we Social Security. And social and economic utility means that the fund should contribute in some way or the other to social and economic development. The workers and employers pay in. So this makes it a trust fund. And with trust fund, we are fiduciaries. So we have to exercise care, we have to exercise diligence, intelligence, we have to act with good faith, and we have to act in the best interest of contributors and beneficiaries, not the minister. And also, good governance. Doing the right things right. So, how does our governance structure looks? We have a board responsible for the stewardship and governance of the fund, shaping policies, crafting strategies, the function of the board, and is legislatively driven to establish an investment committee. And the investment committee, the act specify the composition and the terms of reference. And the investment committee has two functions, two critical functions: advisory to the board on investment matters and oversight. And they oversee the management. NIS manages funds through an internal investment department. About 90% of the funds are in-source and 10% are outsourced to external money manager. But we have also strengthened that framework. So it's legislation plus. And what we've done, we've set up an audit committee and a risk committee, providing assurance, check and balance, control, second opinions. The Audit and Risk Committee clearly covers the entire fund and the organization. The Risk Committee oversees the risk manager, and the Audit Committee oversees the internal auditor. And we went further to ensure that, as Dr. Valder Henry indicated, it's the who. But we want to ensure the who is transformed into making good decisions and responsible decisions. So we've set up investment committee charters that map out how the investment committee functions and the accountabilities, the reporting. The investment policy statement underpins good governance practice. It maps out the role and responsibilities for the director, for the investment manager internally, for the board, for the investment committee, and also the external parties, because we manage a proportion of funds externally. And importantly, we have layered that with a code of ethics that treats with conflict of interest and standard of conduct aligned to the Charter Financial Analyst Codes. So we want to ensure that this investment committee for NIS SVG, chaired by Mr. Lennox Bowman, bringing some expertise in finance, investment, banking leadership. Mr. Elroy John, Deputy Chairman, banking, many years Barclays, finance leadership. Mr. Brian George, engineer, strong in leadership, strong in investment, strong in business. And Mr. Liley Cato, marketing specialist, has business acumen and sound leadership. And Stuart Haynes, ex officio, as the director, serve as a member of the investment committee. One, in terms of unfortunate things there, from a standpoint of good practice. And hopefully, Minister, we create some gender balance. But it's interesting that all the investment committees that I serve, all males. So it's not only a St. Vincent problem. In St. Lucia, in St. Kitts, I have the same issue. So we had to bring some balance with the female. I just know the chair of Bank of St. Vincent is also responsible for selecting the investment committee at Bank of St. Vincent. And again, it's all males. So I believe we all have homework to do with that. But the investment policy statement is a responsibility of the investment committee. And this is what provides the roadmap for how we manage the funds. We must have a return objective. How do we measure success? Throughout the region, the most common one is 3% plus inflation. But Brother Likak, I don't think that was achieved in 2022, given the inflationary spike. And some have a nominal rate. In case of St. Vincent, we have a 4.5%. And the risk tolerance is important. Throughout the region, we are conservative. We have trust fund. And you measure that by looking at the volatility of your return. You don't want the volatility move too much. So we have a cap of the volatility being about 8.5%. But also you have to get a time horizon in investment policy. We Social Security and we are long term. So we have a 10-year time horizon. Risk management was spoke of, that is critical. But also important, the reporting. My investment team must report to executive management. Executive management must report to the board. And the board must report to the minister. That's the accountability set up, and we report to the public. And the investment committee also must determine, either based on past experience or expert judgment, the asset mix. Money market instrument basically speak to deposits, savings, also treasury bills. That's a form where government borrow on short term for 1 year, 90 days. In average in the ECCU, that is 19%. In St. Vincent's, 15%, that's the target. That's the strategic target. In fixed income, meaning the income fixed, typically like when you pay a mortgage, the rate fixed in some cases. So fixed income securities are like bonds. Bonds basically a form of borrowing by government and corporation. It's like a loan, structured loan. And also loans within the fixed income securities. We also hold shares, equities, like the prominent shares we have in Gecko as an individual. Regionally, it's 23%, NIS St. Vincent, 25%. And the real estate, a bit more primary investment, 17% average around the region, St. Vincent, 15%. Your asset allocation is really a function of your risk appetite and the return. You also have to look at your liabilities, because if a significant proportion of my liabilities due within short time, then I have to hold a lot of monies in cash and fixed income. As Dr. Valder Henry said, cash is king, because your obligations are coming due more in the short term, right? And because investment is managed using an approach taking into account how much you have to pay out. So you don't just go and put your money in asset. You have to look at your payout. In our case, benefits and the recurrent administrative expense. But importantly, what's the investment process in NIS looks like? The investment unit will perform the search, the proposal. The investment unit also will be the first line of analysis to make sure we tick the box of safety, liquidity, and yield. And the investment unit would make its recommendation to risk. The CRO will take that proposal and do a risk analysis, identify the risk in the proposal, and provide guidance on risk mitigants. But the risk unit gives a risk opinion. The risk unit does not make any decision, but they give a risk opinion. Then that recommendation now is forwarded to the executive management, senior management for consideration. We will do the second line of analysis and a recommendation to the investment committee. The investment committee, in performing its oversight responsibilities, will review the recommendations coming from management. And the investment committee will then make a recommendation to the board. The board, again, will do their independent review of the investment proposal. Then the board will make a decision. We don't report the no's the board says, simply because it does not convert into financial assets. So if there's a proposal from the government and management says no, well, the board don't even see that no, because management don't take it up to the board, but we will definitely give account of it. If it pass management, reach the investment committee, the investment committee decide that this is not fit and suited for the funds, then the board will just receive it for information purpose. That's how investments are made at the NIS. And we have learned, because we always want like this. However, we have to learn from our lessons. Over our 36 years of managing trust funds, obviously there were mistakes, and I could say that as a chartered financial analyst. And it happened in all organizations. We had challenges with the government of St. Kitts one time. We had challenges with the government of Barbados, challenges with the government of Belize. We learn, we strengthen. Brother Leacock, now you have a very robust investment process. It's a learning process, Brother Fitz, as we all know. This is a dynamic environment. And things change. And that's why the board had to keep the competence up to date. And we ensure that adequate board's education, because the investment market is very, very dynamic. So that's the process. What are the results? What are the outcomes? Total investment in the ECCU space as of 2021, December figures, $6.6 billion. St. Vincent, 0.5 billion. So clearly, NIS is manage a large pool of funds. Investment as a proportion of GDP, just to assess the significance. We carry a weight, 34% on a regional basis and 20% in SVG. So we carry a weight, we are significant. How did the investment grow between 2020 and 2021? In the case of the region, there was a growth of 4%. Case of St. Vincent, there was a decline of minus 0.4%. 2021 was the first year in which our total expenditure exceeded our total income. We had to tap into reserve to assist with that. We had the COVID-19, we had the temporary unemployment benefit, sickness benefit rose almost 20-fold in terms of the sickness claim. So we had a rough 2021. The investment treated us well. On a regional level, the return was 6%. On a local level, it was 5.1%. However, it exceeded the benchmark in case of St. Vincent. We have a benchmark of 4.5%, generally called the actuarial hurdle rate. The local investment, we play a significant role on a regional level with social and economic development. 4.8 billion invested in the ECCU space, which represents 69% of the investment portfolio. 0.3 billion of NIS St. Vincent invests in the local economy, which equivalent to about 58%. Major contributor to local economic and social development. And also, we provide liquidity support to the financial sector. We have deposits in banks and credit union. Own government. When we talk about government, central government exposure, these are investments where the direct risk is government. For instance, some persons may categorize Bank of St. Vincent as a government. Government just has shares in Bank of St. Vincent. Bank of St. Vincent's ability to meet its obligation is a function of their own financial performance, which has linked naturally to the economy. And yes, we lend the Bank of St. Vincent monies, and I wish I could increase the amount. The rate was attractive. So that now we look at public sector exposure. So own government in the region on average 27%, 1.2 billion invest in the own government via bonds and loans. In the case of St. Vincent, as at 31st December 2021, 14%. And the statistics, Dr. Valda Henry, on the regional government security market will show Social Security is the major player on that market. Public sector, taking now the government, general government and statutory bodies, 51%, 3.5 billion invest in public sector. Case of St. Vincent, I segregated it. 19% by way of public sector. From an investment standpoint, Bank of St. Vincent is not included in it, but I still include the 18% exposure to Bank of St. Vincent, which means 37% to the public sector. And the Bank of St. Vincent exposure is 92 million thereabout around this time. And that exposure comprises our savings account. We have to pay our pensions, and we do pay them on time and in full. So Bank of St. Vincent is a major bank. Bank of St. Vincent at one time used to be very generous on rate. We were enjoying some 6 and 5%. But gradually, I reckon under the leadership of an actuary, I reach 1 and 2 and so forth. Right? So we have some fixed deposit at Bank of St. Vincent as well. Also, we provided a loan to the Bank of St. Vincent for the construction of their facility at the Reigate building. I wish the loan could be restructured. It reduced too quick, according to my investment partner. And also we have shares in the Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we have about 20% shares, which means we have 2 seats on the board of Bank of St. Vincent, looking out for the interests of the bank, because their governance means that not NIS, they can't go to the board looking for NIS only. All depositors, all loan holders, all stakeholders, represented by Mr. Lennox Bowman and Mr. Lennox Tim. Both of them continue to add value to the bank, and the chairman is smiling because Lennox Tim's tenure came to an end and the bank requested the extension of Tim. Doing a great job at the Bank of St. Vincent, Lennox Tim. So you see why the retirement age, my friend, has to move, because these guys are the more productive Brother Fitz when they pass 60. So, Brother Bonds Bonady, you have to get a conversation on that. Yes. But importantly, the investment success factors. For investment success, you need governance quality. We need to do things right. We need sound investment policy to guide the investment parties. We need robust risk management framework, and we need strong implementation capabilities. So what are the opportunities ahead? On the governance side, the governance structure can be somewhat enhanced. An amendment to the law to have set minimum suitability standards for investment committee members and create some flexibility around the terms of reference for investment committee, because we're moving in line with best practice. The law was framed in 1987, 86, years ago. We're over 30-something years, so we can give consideration. That does not mean, this recommendation does not mean the investment committee isn't performing. What this means is that with reform, you set standards for the future. I think the FSA Act is one of the acts that has minimum suitability standards for members. And the governance mechanisms need to be strengthened across the region. We have risk management policies, funding policy, Judy will talk about that in a while, and investment policy, but they need to be coordinated so that we can ensure financial sustainability. And the governance effectiveness. The market we operate in is dynamic. So we need structured, collective, and periodic training for board members. From an operation standpoint, external strategic linkages. Derek spoke about diversification, the utilization of external advisors and external investment managers for return enhancement, for diversification, also for capacity building. And we need a clearly defined approach to economically target investment. Whilst putting this presentation together, I received an email, strangely, from Dr. Carl Theodore, professor at UWI, indicating that he wants to meet with me to discuss how we can address the unemployment situation around the youth. And he indicated in the email that he wants Social Security to consider putting 10% in employment creating investment. They are willing, the University of the West Indies, to provide some support around that, but that must be transparent. There are also opportunities for functional cooperation among the ECCU countries. We could share costs and service agreement in risk management, in investment analysis, in advisory services, a knowledge sharing platform where we work close together. We experience the same challenges in different locations. So we can pool our resources to benefit from economies of scale. And Through the OECS, all of us use Excel as the basis to store, record, and analyze investment. We could come together and explore an investment software. ECHMB is advanced with regards to the development of a software. And as a director of that board, I told them once this software is developed, we'd have to share this with other financial and social security institutions across the region. And there are investment offerings. Loan syndication start to grow within the banking space. We can do that where we join with other social security organizations to grant loans. And we diversify there. Investment security swapping. This idea came when I was in Barbados. I had a conversation on reform of social security. And the idea came from a board member of Barbados. The respective countries would have what we call a country bias in investment, meaning you would have greater exposure to your government than another government. So we could create a facility where, let us take, for example, Barbados and St. Vincent, where we price the Barbados bond, price the St. Vincent bond, and Brotherly Cock, we do a swap. All right, so these are opportunities we can explore. So the investment management, in concluding, play a very vital role in the financial sustainability. The governance framework and investment management structure are fit for purpose. However, we can enhance and we can improve, because the issue of strengthening investment and strengthening other functions of social security are journey and process and not destination. So I want to stop here. I believe I'm 1 minute over the 15 minutes, and thank you for your attention. Cheers.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes, for enlightening us into the world of investment management and the importance of having sound investment policies in Social Security. It was a little bit more than the 15 minutes, but we were very interested in what you were telling us, and so I couldn't stop you. And please bear with us. We are really, the time is not being like the best practice, but I think that we are all really enjoying what we are hearing, and I hope you can stay with us. So, and with this, last but not least, I would like to call Ms. Judy Vera to deliver our final presentation. So, Ms. Vera, a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, is an independent consulting actuary providing actuarial services to private employer and government-related pensions plan in the region. Additionally, she has many years of experience in social security field with her work with National Insurance Services of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Turks and Caicos. Ms. Vera, please.
Honorable Camilo Gonzalez, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Technology with responsibility for Social Security, Honorable Curtis King, Minister of Education, other members of Cabinet, other members of Parliament, Dr. Valda Henry, Deputy Governor of the ECCB, Mr. Lennox Bowman, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the NIS, other members of the Board of Directors of the NIS, Mr. Stuart Haynes, Director of the NIS, fellow panelists, other specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. Well, it's been a long night. Please bear with me. I hope everybody is still awake. I know it is a bit late. We all still awake, yes? Yes, great. Before I start, at the very top of this, as I looked around the room, I was a little bit disheartened, and Derek and I were just chatting on that a little bit. I didn't really see a lot of young faces. And this is going to impact them, what we are doing today. And I've been in this business a long time, whether it is on the Social Security side. What's that? Sorry. With the exception, one or two. And with employer-provided pension plans. And time again, you try to drum through to the 30-year-olds, the 35-year-olds, etc. Start saving now. It will accumulate. It will pay off in the long run. You will retire, right? You will retire. There's going to come a time where you do not have that salary coming in, so it matters. Take an interest in your pension plan, whether it be from your employer or whether it be from the NIS. So hopefully some of the youth leaders out there, maybe they're listening and they're not here, and they will take all of this to heart. So what I will really try and do, we've heard about the investments, we've heard about risk management, we've heard about pension reform throughout the region, but we're just going to try and gel it all here together in this last wrap-up. And really, it is really about all of this that we're talking about may fall by the wayside if we don't have what is essentially a funding policy, a set of rules, documented guidance for the board, for those who are in charge of governance, to ensure that they maintain the financial sustainability of the NIS. We have a strong, robust framework, and we do this in an orderly and structured manner, and we achieve certain objectives. So we want to have this written. Everybody, the board, chaired by Mr. Bowman, they follow this, so we can keep in charge of what we are doing here, right? Now, in essence, what that means is this policy, this funding policy, will aim to ensure that we maintain the appropriate balance between our income stream and our expenditure stream over the long term, not just for tomorrow, okay? And also, too, it will speak to the funding policy, needs to speak to how are we going to finance the costs of the NIS. That's very important. The costs are pretty much given. They're enshrined in the NIS Act as it is right now. How are we going to finance those costs? And more importantly, is it on also? No. Okay. And more importantly, the funding policy will also tell us what is the trigger, what event has to happen that says to the board, to the people who are in charge of governance, listen, it's time for us to make some reform measures. We need to look at this now and not wait until we're at the end of the cliff and we start to fall over the cliff. So when I talk about the costs of the NIS, we're really talking mainly about the long-term benefit costs, not so much the short-term benefits branch, okay? What it is the long-term benefits branch with those pension benefits, because those are lifetime benefits. Derek showed us a chart where people are living longer and longer. I think he said 18% of those were getting pensions for about 30 years and still going on, right? So that's a significant liability that the NIS has. How are we going to finance those benefits for the lifetime of those pensioners? We know that the costs of the NIS will naturally increase over time. That's going to be a given, even if we don't do anything. Because over time, we have the aging of the population, we have low fertility rates. As I say, long time, my parents, it's 11 of us. Now, I had 3 children. My children, I don't even know if they will have, well, I have 1 now, but, right? But we understand that. Fertility rates are low, yes? Okay, so costs, no matter if we don't do anything, we're going to have the aging of the population. We're going to have more and more pensioners coming into the system. The costs will increase just by doing nothing. But on top of that, costs are going to experience volatility. There are various risks that are going to be faced. Valda spoke to some of those risks, and that could just upend all of the costs, right? So we're going to have some variability there. And also to emergent experience. So our overall goal is to ensure that sufficient funds on hand, I'm going to just jump, to ensure that sufficient funds on hand to meet those promised benefits expected and unexpected. We have to prepare for what we don't know. We have to have that buffer for the long term. Now, I spoke about the funding policy. We'll also speak about, we want to meet certain objectives in this funding policy. And the funding policy to meet many of the things that we already spoke about this evening. And I'll quickly go over it because I know time is against me. Long-term financial sustainability. That's a given. We talk about that over and over. We also have to define in the funding policy a suitable financing system that is suitable to the nature of the long-term benefit that we are financing, okay? So short-term benefits, you could fund for it using a pay-as-you-go system. Money in, money out, no problem. You maybe have about 1 year's worth of reserve. But this is long-term benefits. We need a larger reserve. We want to make sure in the funding policy we speak to minimum target reserve levels are maintained. We always want to make sure we have a sufficient buffer. Why? Unforeseen circumstances. We've all experienced COVID, anything like that could happen. We want to be able to have, in those odd times when our expenditure is greater than income, we have that buffer that we can rely on, we can dig into it. Having the reserves also affords us the stability of the contribution rates over the medium to long term. So that is all very important. In terms of, again, objectives of the funding policy, we want to ensure that once a contribution rate or contribution rates, because that is also possible, you know, you can, a particular NIS board may not necessarily say, okay, we're going to go from 10% to 15%. It may be done in a phase stage, 10, 11, 12, etc., but eventually leveling off, right? So once that contribution rate or set of rates are announced, we want that rate to remain stable for an extended period of time. We want stability in the system. At the end of the day, the board doesn't want to have to go back to everybody, to the stakeholders every Monday morning and say, oh gosh, things really bad. We have to increase the contribution rate. We have to change the benefit accrual rate. They want to make these reform measures. Once it is done, it can hold the sound financial condition of the fund for the medium to long term. Now, the particular NIS board, this one in particular, they will have to decide how they will define that medium to long term. Is it 15 years? Is it 20 years that they want to attain this stability? But stability is really key as an objective for the NIS. Nobody wants volatility in their life, right? And of course, we've spoken about it. We want a contribution rate that is affordable, that is tolerable, by the average contributor. And it is deemed to be adequate for the benefits that it is providing. So affordability and adequacy. I think Derek spoke about that, and that is also very important. The funding policy also needs to consider intergenerational equity. You don't want to place undue financial burden on one cohort of the population relative to their promised benefits, right? You want to get that sweet spot. You want to get a balance between the contribution rates that you are adopting now and the benefits. Everybody has to pay a little price at the end of the day. The pensioners have to give a little bit, the contributors have to give a little bit. And hopefully we can find a balance that everybody can agree on. The objectives of the funding policy will also consider the risk appetite and the enterprise risk management policy. What is also very important is that the funding policy and the investment policy, they are aligned and they are compatible. Because remember, the funding policy is going to speak to how are we financing these long-term benefit costs. It's going to generate contributions. It's going to generate income. The investment policy, on the other hand, has to be able to take that income, that contribution, and then decide, okay, this is where we are going to invest it. These are the various assets that we are going to invest in. Stuart went into detail about that. But those two policies must speak to each other. They must be compatible and they must be aligned. And last but not least, which is what we are trying to do here tonight, transparency and accountability in the financing of the NIS. I think I was telling Stuart, I said, Stuart, I feel like every time I put on the radio, the TV, the newspaper or something, I see you there talking about NIS. Honestly, I mean, speaking objectively, I think he really has done an excellent job in terms of keeping everybody informed. Whether you want to hear the information or not, Stuart is giving you the information. He's up in your face. And now he has Derek too this week, up in your face, right? So whether or not we want that information, it has been provided to all of us. We may not like the story all the time, but that's okay. The other thing now, the funding policy will also have to consider, remember I said we have to be prepared for expected benefits and unexpected. We have to be prepared for that sort of variability. There are risks that the NIS faces. Now, risk means an event that could happen. It's not saying that the event is happening. It's an event that could happen. And if it happens, it could cause a significant variability in the financing of the fund, negatively so. So we have to be prepared. We have to understand what are those risks that the NIS is facing. By understanding that, we can be better prepared that if those events happen, we know how to deal with it. We can try and do our best. So things like, first and foremost, delayed implementation of reforms. I can't remember who on the panel spoke about it, but that's the whole point. When the actuary does the valuation, they're doing a projection, a 60-year projection. They're looking right down the road, the next 10, 15 years. They have a pretty much good idea where the reserves are going to go, how the cost is going to go. So they can tell the board today, listen, here now, about 10 years down the road, well, in the case of SVG, NIS SVG, I think 2035 or so, or something like that, Joel said. Right. They are telling the board today, in the year 2023, things are not going to look so good down the road. You're okay now, but you need to make reform measures today to avoid that happening in 2035. And that is the role of the actuary. Now, if a board, which happens many times, I think Derek has had that experience, they can hear that from the actuary. We can only give recommendations. But if they do not implement those reforms, well, trouble, right? The example was given with Grenada, where they delayed increasing their retirement age. So delaying it is not going to eradicate the problem. The problem is still there. The cliff will still be there, right? It just means if you wait longer and longer to implement the reforms, when that time comes, it is going to be that much harsher and more drastic and more painful for everyone. So all of this is why we're having these programs here. Okay, some of the other risks very quickly. Investment returns lower than expected. In terms of the income generated by NIS of SVG, and pretty much I think most of them, about 70 to 80% of total income comes from contribution income. And the balance really, let's say 30%. You have surcharge income, but forget that. About 30% is coming from investment income. So it's not a major source. It's still important. We still have to keep our eye on it, right? So we have to look out for investment returns lower than assumed. I know Stuart wanted to bad talk me just now with BOSVG, but that's okay. I'm ignoring him because I'm not wearing that hat tonight. Reserves, if we have all of this money, if we don't productively invest that money, then it's a waste of time, right? If that money just sitting on getting 0% rate of return, waste of time, right? If population starts to age faster than expected, yes, we work with mortality tables, we have average life expectancies, etc. But sometimes that may not actually turn out to be the actual mortality experience of NIS of SVG. You could have things where pension amounts are growing faster than expected. The scheme, when it is still in that maturity phase, it still hasn't quite settled in terms of its demographic ratio, right? So it is very susceptible to a lot of variability, and therefore expenditure could be quite volatile. So all of that can throw off the financial condition of the fund if we are not prepared. Adverse economic environment, very, very important. We need to have high unemployment. With high unemployment, people contribute to the NIS, but also high compliance too. They could be working and not necessarily comply. So it goes hand in hand. So we need high unemployment, we need high compliance. High employment, sorry. My apologies. High employment and high compliance, right. Because all of that money then broadens our contribution base, okay? So all of those things are very important. Administrative expenses, this is also a risk where inefficiencies leading to cost overruns. Liquidity risks, where the fund is close to or fully depleted. We are not going to get to that point. I am sure, no way, no how, but it is that risk that is there. I think Derek spoke that most are within 10 years of fund depletion if no reform measures are taken, okay? Always remember that, it's if no reform measures are taken. Right, reputational risk is really about not engaging the stakeholders, but I already spoke to that. Stuart and his team, they've done an excellent job keeping everybody informed. I knew there was some rumbling recently because the 11th actuarial review was not made public. That is up on the website now, so we could stop grumbling about that particular aspect. Now, so we've spoken about the funding policy, trying to meet these objectives, considering the risks that it's faced, and at the end of the day, the funding policy very specifically will speak to its risk appetite, risk tolerance. Very simply, it will be spelled out in the funding policy, and there is one right now for NIS of SVG, and all the other NISs in the region are currently preparing similar policies, okay? They are not unique. Is that the reserves must not be less than 3 times the projected annual expenditure. So if we see the reserves go below that, we're looking down the road. Remember, the actuary does projections. So the actuary is looking down the road. And if down the road the actuary sees there's going to be a point in time where the reserves fall below 3 times the annual expenditure, that spells trouble. That's a warning sign. That's a trigger. Okay, so that will then lead me. So that is a trigger. When we see that happening, the funding policy will then say, then automatically the contribution rate will increase 0.5% per year until it gets to that level where we can get back to a reserve level above 3 times annual expenditure. Now, that is an automatic adjustment. However, that could be dampened a little bit by doing other changes on the other side, right? We can freeze benefit increases, we can reduce the replacement rate, the benefit accrual rate, we could make a deterrent to taking early retirement pensions. All of those other issues can also be adopted, and therefore that automatic contribution rate increase maybe does not need to be as high as 0.5% per year, right? Those things will go in tandem with each other. But at the end of the day, what is important, again, in terms of governance, and this will be enshrined in the funding policy, is that then says to you, look, maybe let's look at the funding policy again. Is it still relevant? Let's consult with the actuary, the board, management, everybody come together and let us see what are the reform measures that have to be taken and make sure that we implement them. Don't just look at them on a piece of paper in black and white, right? Waste of time. But you have to look at them, you review them, and you decide, listen, we are going to adopt these in a timely manner, announce it to employees and employers, and say, listen, this is going to happen in the next year or 2. The minister has already hinted, yeah, but you're more than hinted actually, right? At that. So that is really very critical. Sometimes too, the actuary may do an interim assessment to determine, okay, if these reform measures are actually adopted, what will this do for the financial condition of the fund? How much time I have? Joanna, where's Joanna? I have like 2 minutes. Okay, very quickly. Nearly finished. Oh, fantastic. Right. All right. So I did speak about the funding policies really looking at the cost of the NIS, and what is really driving the cost is the long-term benefit branch, right? It accounts for about 80% of the cost of the NIS right now. Over time, that's easily going to grow to about 90% of the cost. So that really is where the focus is, where all our energy is, not so much the short-term benefits or employment entry. Yes, those are important, but we really want to focus on the long-term benefit branch because those are the pension benefits, right? How are we going to finance it? What the method that is used is what is referred to as a partially funded system. It is designed to have a deficit. It is not designed to be 100% fully funded. Why is that? Because this is done on an open group basis. Open group, there's a constant flow of new entrants into the system. There will always be people coming into the system. So it's okay to have it as a partially funded system. This is pretty much right across the board, throughout the region, throughout the world. Very few, I don't know of any. Maybe I was telling Valda, I believe Kuwait might be fully funded. Exactly, right. But everybody else, you're talking about a partially funded system. So, and really what that means is that you set a contribution rate high enough, right? So that will generate income, that will pay your expenditures, right? And then you will still have some change left over. And that change left over, you put that in your reserve fund. And you keep putting it in your reserve fund, and your reserve fund keeps accumulating, they invest in it, and it keeps growing and growing. Remember, we want that reserve fund to act as a buffer for unforeseen circumstances to allow us to keep that contribution rate as stable as possible for as long as possible. So it really is key. Now, yes, there may be blips as we had in 2020, 2021 with COVID. I've seen it in Turks and Caicos all the time. They've had great, they've always had excess contribution income to go into their reserve fund. But COVID happened, it was the first time they had to dip into their investment income and their reserves to try and pay the bills, right? And maybe the other, I don't know if anybody else in the region. But so it's really important that reserve fund allows for the stability of the contribution rate. Very quickly, just so I'll try and keep it simple. So when the actuary does the valuation, right? As I said, you have to look down the road. We do it over a 60-year cycle, cradle to grave. That sounds harsh, but that's the way it is. We follow persons from the time they enter into the system. They are youth, they start working, they start contributing, they leave the system, they start collecting pensions, they eventually die. They may give to their spouse, etc. But that is the whole idea of doing the valuation. You're following it for a 60-year period, cradle to grave. And clearly that's going to be based on obviously actuarial methodologies, but certainly a defined set of assumptions, which is really very important. Scheme-specific assumptions, such as what would be the compliance rate, what would be the coverage rate, what would be the expected rate of return on the investment. And you're talking about over a 60-year period. And economic assumptions, what would be the growth of GDP, what would be the unemployment rate, labor force participation. That is why the census that we're doing now is critical to preparing these valuations. So based on all of that, that is then fed into a model, and the actuary then has a projection of the income stream and the expenditure stream. Income stream is contribution income, investment income, surcharge income, 3 components. Expenditure stream, benefit expenditure, administrative expenses, okay? And what is really important is how those 2 income and expenditure streams move relative to one another. You want to always make sure that that income stream is above that expenditure stream. That is what you're aiming for. And the actuary is going to look for that and see down the road, when is that going to start to change? That is a warning sign. That is a trigger that we spoke about. And very importantly, they just don't do one projection. So I'm sure when Derek would have done it for the past reviews and this one, you also want to look at a worst case scenario because you want to be able to inform the board, say, listen, okay, these are the results. However, you got to be prepared on the odd chance, what if unemployment is even higher than we expect? What if GDP grows slower than we have assumed, etc.? What if the population grows slower than we have assumed? This is what would happen. And that informs the board, well, these things could happen. The results could not be as rosy as we think. We have to prepare for that today also. All right? So with that, I'm just going to wrap up in terms of the funding policy. It must also speak to roles and responsibilities. The board, of course, oversight responsibility for the management of and compliance with the funding policy. They are also responsible for ensuring that the funding policy is reviewed periodically. And if they have to make any amendments, they go and do that. They have to ensure that they appoint an actuarial firm at least every 3 years. They review the results and recommendations and ensure that corrective measures are taken in a deliberate and decisive manner, in a timely manner. I keep emphasizing in a timely manner, to ensure at the end of the day, we continue to meet the objectives that I spoke about earlier. We continue to maintain the minimum reserve level. Remember, we do not want to go below 3 times our projected annual expenditure. So that is the role of the board. Management, of course, is to implement and operationalize the components of the policy, establish internal controls given the risk appetite, monitor and report on key financial indicators. The actuary, their role is stipulated in the NIS Act. Essentially, it is a report on the financial condition of the fund and the adequacy of the contributions to support the benefits. If the actuary doesn't like what he's seeing, or she, then he must report on that and provide recommendations to ensure sound governance and continued long-term financial sustainability, and certainly if you have to do interim assessments. And I want to also emphasize, when the actuary does their work, they attest to the fact that they've abided by professional standards. There are standards, professional standards, under the Caribbean Actuarial Association, APS 3, anybody can look it up, and the International Standards of Actuarial Practice 2, ISAP 2, which is from the International Actuarial Association, which deals with how we must report and prepare Social Security valuations. All right, so all of that is going to be tied up in the funding policy, and it really encompasses everything that we've spoken about tonight. And with that, thank you.
So, Ms. Vera, thank you so much for your presentation. Last, but really enlightening as well. So I had also a little summary, but I will just go over it because time is already long. So I don't know if we could still suggest to have at least a little round of question and answers, if you're still available, if you can still bear with us. So in order to not only keep track of the time that we haven't so far, but at least to have more people to give voice to more than just 1 or 2 persons. So I would like to ask you if we could. So when you want to ask something, please introduce yourself. So eventually some of you or most of you already know each other, but not all of us. So before asking, please kindly introduce yourself by stating your name and position. Secondly, so keep in mind that we have participants and we want to give everyone a chance to speak. Well, I mean, not everyone, but we want to hear you. Be brief and direct. So please make a question or a comment as concise as direct as possible. And we had also a few persons online. I'm not sure if any one of them has introduced a question or not. So if we still have a little bit of time, I think we can also take something that comes from our streamline. And if you think that you want to address your questions to a specific panelist, please indicate so when you're speaking. That will also keep us, give us a little bit of more time. So please feel free to raise your hand to ask. I think there will be 2 micros going around the room. So
Thanks.
Thank you very much. You need both of them. My name is Fitz Bramble. I'm a member of parliament, opposition member of parliament, and an economist by training and practice. I really didn't plan to speak because I prefer to give the opportunity to others who sometimes may not have the opportunities that I have from where I sit. But since people were taking long to raise their hands, I'd go. And I'd be very, very brief. I recall Derek made a point which resonates with me to my core. And the point that you made was that having more people working for higher wages is critical to the sustainability of the fund. And to me, that is the issue in our context. I'm not gonna go elaborate in the interest of time. But what I'd like to ask, because when I review the 11th actuarial report, all of the recommendations seem to be the recommendations for reform. None of them seem to point in any meaningful way to more effective investments, that's how I would put it. In fact, in the executive summary on page 3, it says here that at the current stage of fund financing, higher investment returns will have little material impact on overall reserves. That to me is of great concern, because it gives the impression that focusing on investments, and I'm just putting it this way, it gives the impression that focusing on investments and effective investments is not as important as some of the other recommendations, which of course I'm not going to get into. But I don't know if any of the panelists would wish to comment on what I just said. And before I hand over the mic, I forgot to congratulate all of you for a very, very high level presentation tonight. I think this is timely, it's much needed, and hopefully we'll have more of this. Thank you very much.
One at a time. Okay, so quick response is, so if you do the mathematics, and we look at the gap right now between contributions and investment income, and we do 450 million by say 3% more, that's $15 million more. Yes, it makes a difference, but it's not going to move the needle. It won't change the outlook that much, right? And to get 3% more, you'll be taking some additional risk that could end up, like for actually Barbados, and this is a true story. They went chasing returns behind government bonds paying 8%, as opposed to looking at their maximum tolerance level, which was 55%. They reached 70% at one point in time. What happened? They restructured according to the portfolio. So the investment return is one thing. Things do happen, as we heard today. And so the point there was, don't bank on this higher returns. As you said, but in my report, it's to the NIS board. That economic stuff we talk about is to the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines. The NIS board can't really do much to control that. But I will say now, I have the microphone, that as small islands, we really have to look at ease of doing business, the cost of doing business, right? And making ourselves attractive enough to encourage Vincentians who have left and now have resources to come back home and create jobs. And also international, be open to foreign investment, and be open to Jamaicans and Guyanese and Haitians to come, and they're going to build your economy, right? Creating jobs and making St. Vincent bigger and stronger.
Next question.
Let me say good night to everybody present here. I am Cecil Jack, a retiree, past teacher, and a trade unionist. I am going to make some comments which I think other people will not like to appreciate. From what is presented this afternoon, it is my view that we cannot divorce it from the political development of the state. And I will take what in the actuarial review, because I have 3 issues I'm going to deal with. 1, a strong economy is critical to a buoyant, sustainable NIS. The point I'm making is simply this, that if the state economy is not strong, as is pointed out here, and our development strategy over the last few years, and for quite a while, when we neglect agriculture, because agriculture is going to be the key for people to work and contribute to the NIS. And I think the administration of the day have to put some serious consideration in terms of reviving agriculture in a meaningful way, not just talking about it. Secondly, the issue of this is a political issue too, large capital projects. Over the years, we have done well in large capital projects. The question is, to what extent have these projects been able to contribute significantly to the NIS? This is a question we must really ask. And thirdly, the final point I want to make has to do with what I will call a culture of NIS. It has to do with education. It seemed to me that we figured that in educating people is only when they start to work. But I am advocating this afternoon that we start a program within the school system that even from kindergarten, people understand what it means to be involved in the NIS. So the time they reach working age, it becomes natural and automatic. That is something we can consider. I have a lot more issues, but a lot of people here. So it's free to any of the panelists to comment on what I have said.
All right, thank you for your suggestion and comment. Clearly, they are very useful suggestions around the economy. As the actuarial report indicates, a good economy is good for a sustainable NIS. Your suggestions are noted, and management would record them to drive the reform process. Thank you.
Good evening. Everyone, my name is Luke Brown. I'm an economist, a lawyer, a politician in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm very interested in the subject of social security, and I think that we've had a rich harvest tonight from some very high-level expertise, and I'd just like to express my appreciation for it. The chair of our local NIS, when he was making his comments, made the point that this is an exercise that could contribute to an improvement in the state of social security literacy in this country, and I think that we have gone a long way in that direction. And he also made the point about the need for us to have reform that is fit for our values and our system. Against that backdrop, I'd just like to pick up on one issue that was raised in the presentation by Mr. Osborne, and that has to do with the contribution rate and the expenditure rate for the NIS. You did present information which shows that at an earlier dispensation of the NIS, the contribution rate was higher than the expenditure rate, and that it's now basically the reverse. What I'd like to know, because I think it's pertinent in assessing the matter of reform, is what is the average contribution rate and the average expenditure rate of the NIS over the entire course of its lifetime. Because if you have that bit of information, I suppose you'd be able to tell whether or not NIS is in a reasonable financial position. I also note that the reform discussion tends to revolve around adjustments to contribution rate and adjustment to the retirement age. Basically, we've had that reform discussion before, and that led to a round of reform in 2014, which is still playing itself out, and which has seen contribution rate arrive at 10% and retirement age inching towards 65. What I'd like to know, I mean, I tend to think that it's a basic equation, and that you have a scenario where, and I think this is at the crux of the matter, a retiree, as far as I understand from a previous presentation, will more or less receive, I mean, we talk about investments and all these other things which are relevant to the NIS, but a retiree is basically going to receive all the contributions that they've made over the course of their time in the NIS within 2 years of retirement. And this is where, as we've seen, persons are living to 80 years old. So to me, at the heart of making NIS sustainable is the question of whether or not you're going to lengthen the period of time over which a retiree is going to receive a return on all their contributions. You may do that in several ways. Mrs. Vera pointed out possible modifications to the accrual rate, which I think is at the heart of the matter. But I think that that is a matter that needs to be addressed. And just two other small points as well, which I think might have an important cumulative effect on the possibilities for the NIS, is the question, I know that the salary, that pension is paid on the basis of the best 5 years over the course of a person's income contribution history. I tend to think that it is fair for pension to actually be paid over on the basis of the average income of an individual over the entire career. I don't see what's the rationale for the best 5 years being the basis of that payment. And finally, and this is a matter which has something to do with social solidarity. There's a question of there being a cap on the insurable earnings, which means that you only pay contributions on the first $4,300 of your income, whereas you might make a lot of income. Is it possible for that cap to possibly be removed, even while maintaining the pension reference salary? I think these are perhaps some points for attention. Thank you.
I guess I'll go first. 1, 2, 1. Did you do it, huh? 1. All right, thank you very much for that feedback and those comments. I got it. So several things. So in the report, there's something called general average premium. Essentially, we look at the average cost over the long term of benefits. Now, there is no need, we believe, to fully fund the NIS. Right? Fully fund means you have enough assets on hand to meet future benefits that have already been earned. Because once the land mass of St. Vincent and the Grenadines exists, and there are people here, there'll be a government here, and then you can always have contributions coming in. So your next point is a key thing is the balance between the promise, the value of the promise, and the amount you're contributing. And that's where I think we have not done a good job. And across the region, not only here, but in terms of we kept contribution rates too low for too long. I kept the promise too generous for too long. Right? And so we have people, I'm not sure how many people actually get the money back in 2 years. Maybe 10, 15%, I don't know. But there are a few people who get their money back very quickly, but there's some who probably take 15, 20 years to get it back. Those are the very top end. And so we have to go back to the books and look at the generosity of our systems. Actually, I'm working on a generosity index, so give me another month or two, and I will have what I think is a way of measuring how generous the system is. And what we see is that the people at the lower end with short careers are the ones who win big. Because the formula is weighted to short service, and lower income folks get a minimum pension bump up, right? It's the folks at the higher end who work for 35 years, 40 years, right, who get and at the ceiling probably, who don't get the benefit that the other younger ones get. So the ceiling exists, and the ILO rep can probably speak to this as well as I can, or probably better than I can, in terms of, so the idea was to provide this basic floor of income, this basic safety net for all, leaving room for the private sector and for higher income people to take care of themselves above a certain level. So yes, I hear you about collecting contributions from earnings above the $4,300 a month, but not paying benefits on them, right? That's something we certainly can discuss, right? It's not been done in the Caribbean before. There have been approaches where you increase the ceiling and don't take all of the wages into account, maybe half of it into account on the benefit side. But we could get into a discussion where we could look at having the higher income people pay above $4,300, but not benefit above $4,300. It's like a tax, right? So essentially, but the government charges taxes where there's no link between benefits and contributions. In our business, Social Security, there is that definite link, and they therefore will be moving away from that, okay? But we could discuss it, where we are right now, whatever, all ideas on the table, and if that can fly in St. Vincent and Grenadines, then we look at it. The career average is the last one. So, and again, when these schemes were first started, go back 50, 60 years, there were no computers. And so some schemes had cards, physical cards where you paid with a card and a stamp, and it was very archaic in today's environment. So the 3-year average was probably administratively easy. You find the best 3 in the last 10, and that was what they started with. Most have gone to 5 and 15, or some 5 and over the whole career, some 10 over the whole career. And the reason is that pensions are designed to replace lost income. And so you want to link the pension you get on the day one close to the salary you were getting on day last of your earnings, right? What we have in industrialized countries, the US, Canada, Australia, England, is a career average, but it's an indexed career average. So the wages from 40 years ago are bumped up with inflation to today's value, right? So we could look at that. And that's a more equitable way of paying pensions, because those people who jack up their earnings in St. Vincent just before they retire, they win big, right? And so we have to find ways. Technology has now advanced for us to do different things, and so we need to think, again, a solution that suits St. Vincent and Grenadines today.
So I have a question coming from our online participants. And the question is, when the reserves exceed the stipulated 300%, will the contribution rate be readjusted downwards?
The contribution rate, sorry. No, so the funding policy, the funding policy is set that once that reserve level, if that reserve level falls below 3 times the projected annual expenditure, the contribution rate will automatically increase 0.5% per year. And it will increase to a level such that we can get back to preserve that an appropriate reserve level of more than 3 times the annual expenditure. So it will go up. However, I think what I also said is that we can dampen or mitigate to a certain level how much that contribution rate will increase by doing other reform measures on the other side, whether it be freezing benefit increases, deterring early retirement, etc. So we can mitigate it somewhat. Okay.
Yes, good night. My name is Kijo Peters. I'm a public servant, and I want to thank the panelists for the presentation, and the moderator, Ms. Henriquez, for managing their time very well. Now, I have a lot of questions, but I'll do 2 at this time. Any of the actuaries can answer. When I was reading the actuarial review, there was this recommendation, and it said It's talking about changing the composition of the investment committee, right? So my question is, why was this recommendation made? Well, that's the first question. And the next one is related to investment. And Ms. Vera was speaking about, it makes no sense for us to have reserves that are not being invested, prudently. And in the review, it mentioned that 83% of the reserves were utilized and 17% were not being invested. And I think the report said that was considered high. So what is the cap as it relates to the most that one should invest in terms of the reserves for the NIS?
So I'll start with the second one first. And ideally, you want to have all of your
everything
assets, net assets invested. I think a decision has been made here sometimes to hold cash in anticipation of changing economic times, to then you invest in more lucrative investments. And so I would say that you're probably overexposed now in short-term assets, given that there's no real need for that much cash on hand. But investment experts think otherwise. So, there's nothing wrong with it. I think right now, short-term cash is paying 4.5–5% on the US market. So there's nothing wrong with it. In terms of the first question about the investment committee. So NIS has this big pool of funds. The board as constituted in the law has no requirement for the competencies or the fit and proper nature of any board member. So it could be there's no test of background, experience and qualifications. Neither is investment committee. So right now you have the investment committee that is all board members, including the chairman, on the investment committee. And so we just felt that it was good governance to have some experts. SVG has, I'm sure, investment people, not necessarily board members, external to the board, support the board in making recommendations. Now, the investment committee, first of all, has no authority to make a decision. They only give recommendations, okay? So the idea was to have some expert people join the committee and therefore help in decision making, well, help in advisory to the board. So it's some independence, and we believe it's better governance for the institution.
No, I was just looking at the phrasing, how it said replace 2 of the board members with non-board.
Well, so the count itself was adequate. So you can't just add 2 more people to make a Gussie May, well, that's a Bahamian word, a big investment committee. So the idea was to just, instead of having, I think it's 5 members you have now?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're all, so 5 of 9 board members serve on investment committee. So maybe you have, keep the 5, maybe 3 board members and 2 non-board members with specific expertise. I also believe, and this may come in the next recommendations to come, that the same way we heard a while ago that the Financial Services Act has fit and proper rules for board members, trustees in pension plans, their guidelines for their selection, and the ECCB has guidelines for board members. I think we should probably put in place some fit and proper guidelines for board members for the NIS. This is nothing personal to St. Vincent and Grenadines, but I think one of the reasons why our boards, our social security schemes around the region have not done as well as they probably could have done, right, is testament to the nature of the boards that have been in place for 40, 50 years across the region. I really believe, and I know Mr. Valda may disagree, but I really believe that most of our boards have not had the fit and proper guidelines that we should have. Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, just another online question. So Mr. Haynes, please, could you speak on how can NIS influence private sector to get into more collaboration and create greater employment, new strategies, ideas, creative ventures that drive local development through, for instance, agro-processing or other partnerships?
Right, thank you. The whole thrust of cooperation across the region to stimulate economic growth and address the issue of unemployment. That can be had, for instance, I have developed a concept paper for the CARICOM heads meeting in Jamaica for us to think through setting up a secretariat that would work on coordinating ideas and strategies between different social security organizations. And that secretariat would be the driver around research and so forth. So what would happen is that we will develop a concept paper on it with regards to how we can work with different sectors. It cannot be just agriculture, but the productive sectors, and also work with other stakeholders like banks. And naturally the policies of government is important to lay the platform to see where there are opportunities. So that is one pooling of resources, financial resources across the region so that we can mitigate whatever risk, but also pooling of human resources to help with the assessment and to help with the independence and transparency of engaging in those type of investments. So that is how those opportunities can be burned, because we know an issue that impacts confidence in the region speak to the whole issue of social security investment in government. So if we devise a transparent, structured approach across the region where we can pool resources and use that resources to drive economic growth regionally, then that will be a better platform than individual social security, because all of us, as I said, face the same issues of unemployment, but how can we sort of benefit from economies of scales and the sharing of resources so that we can address this very important issue that impact the sustainability of social security. We still.
Good night to everyone. Protocol already being established. My name is Cindy Pierre. I'm president of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Nurses Association, and I'm here as a concerned civil servant and representing my association. My question is, I have listened to the panelists. Discussion was very informative. My question is, for the proposals made, how sustainable are they? We're talking about different mitigating factors such as low fertility rate, demographics, good economy. We're talking about higher paying wages. How can I be rest assured? Because as Ms. Henry said, we cannot discuss strategies without discussing the risks. So how sustainable will these measures be in preserving the NIS, and to making sure that as a future pensioner, as a civil servant, how does it affect us? As stated, we cannot control different mitigating factors. Who would have known that in 2021 that we would have been affected by a global pandemic and a erupting volcano? Can we say for sure that these measures that we are proposing will be the way out for us? Are we 20, 35 years, 40, 50 years from now? Would civil servants be back here? Would my grandchildren be back here with the same discussion, having the same discussion, and I as a pensioner worrying if I would be like the gentleman going to the supermarket shoplifting because my pension was not on time? So my question is, what I would want to know as a civil servant, as a future pensionable, how sustainable would these methods, proposals be for future and continued protection of our NIS pension and reserves?
Is this a 2050?
Yeah.
Oh. Thank you. I will attempt a bit, and then Derek and the actuaries could come in. The thing is, again, if you go back to the design of the Social Security system, the system was designed, as we say, to pay as you go, up to a period. Oftentimes it's up to like 30 years, which is deemed to be a generation. And so it means that in order for the system to remain sustainable, you would have to do reform along this way. This reforms that has been proposed is meant to take the system up to 2050, thereabouts, 2050, 2055. And so just maybe like 10 years before 2050 or 5 years before 2050, we would find ourselves back here. If we don't want to find ourselves back here, we can do like Canada. The citizens of Canada determined that when Social Security was being established, they did not want to have to be coming every 20 years, 40 years with a new increase. So they asked the actuary, what is the perpetual rate? What is the rate of contribution that will ensure that this system will be in perpetuity funded so we don't have to come back? That rate is not small. So maybe Derek could work on what is the perpetual rate, then provide the answer. So you then decide, do we want to go to that perpetual path, or will we do this every 30 years as a generation? So, you know, these are the options here. But what, I'm coming back to you just now. So that is part of that big answer. And as I'm here, Derek had said something about, I would maybe disagree with, he said that there should be a system of maybe a fit and proper person form, which is what ECCB has for the banks and so forth. I can't ever disagree with that because it is about good governance. And so remember, we talk about having persons who are there. And one of the things I've recommended for years now is that not just for Social Security boards, but boards generally should have a governance policy manual that outlines the responsibilities of board members, outlines the characteristics or the qualifications you are looking for. Not just about qualifications, we recognize that character matters, that you're looking for board members. And so it provides a form of training, because if you have it, an education, and I've always advocated for at least any new board that comes in, an orientation program. Just like when you have new employees, you onboard them, that new board members should also be onboarded. Don't just send them a package of the acts and the policies, because we know some people will never get to read them because these things are voluminous. So you have a training that captures the key element. I think she had a comeback, Joanna, so you might want to take a comeback and then close. Just take the comeback and maybe close.
Yeah, take the comeback.
My comeback is, if we are to avoid this with the perpetual rate that you said Derek can suggest, then we would have to involve the Minister of Finance over there. So that will have to be a discussion for another time.
Well, yes, but it's not Derek suggested. I'm suggesting you buy what you don't want to come back here. Or the increase of salaries, well then that is something else. Yes,
so,
you can close.
thank you. I'm sure that a lot of you would have some other comments, suggestions, questions. Unfortunately, I was told that we need to wrap up, we need to finish. The hour is already, wow, gone.
Just give you a summary. We don't have to do one. Just give you a
Okay,
summary.
no, yes. So, what I would...
Let's just give one. Let's just wrap up.
So, as we conclude today's panel on the critical topic of pension reform, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished panelists for sharing their invaluable insights, to you, our audience, for your active participation here and engagement here and online, and to the NIS for inviting me to moderate this panel. So let us remember that pension reform is not just a policy issue discussed in boardrooms or political chambers. It is a subject that has a deep and lasting impact on the quality of life of each and every citizen. So it is an issue that, if not addressed with the urgency, complexity, and compassion it deserves, could become a ticking bomb with vast social implications. So with this, I finish. I don't know if...
No, Director Matthews.
Okay.
Yes.
You can say it's short.
Thank you very much. Quite an informative session, and I know that many persons were also following online. But what we'll do now is we'll invite our director join Matthew to do the vote of thanks.
It's a gift to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Jay Danzai said, your smile is your logo, your personality is your business card. How you leave others feeling after having an experience with you becomes your trade. I hope your experience this evening was a good one. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen present here at our conference room and virtually, the pleasure is mine to show our appreciation to all who have made this evening's discussion such a success. Our sincere thanks to our Master of Ceremony, the lovely Avia Charles, who have ably ensured the smooth flow of this evening's proceedings. Brother Lily Cato for invoking God's presence and guidance on the proceedings. We felt truly blessed. Jamora Francis, what a wonderful display of talent. Thanks for that wonderful rendition of our national anthem. It is said that positive first experience is a vital start to building relationships with potential clients. Our chairman of the board, Brother Lennox Bowman, thanks for making that first impression and presenting the synopsis for the evening's discussion. We do appreciate you. Honorable Camilo Gonzalez, thanks for not only gracing us with your presence, but for your usual insightful presentation. We thank you. Our esteemed group of panelists, Derek Osborne, Dr. Valda Henry, and in case you didn't know, she's the first female deputy governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And she also has years of experience in Social Security. Our own Miss Judith Vera, and our very own Director Stuart Haynes. Our sincere gratitude for your excellent presentation. I am sure all of us are much more informed about NIS pension reform and all the areas presented and discussed. We also express our sincere thanks to our esteemed panelists for readily agreeing to share your knowledge, experiences, and expertise with not only NIS, but St. Vincent and the Grenadines on a whole. We sincerely thank you. To our moderator, Joanne Borges, thank you, our heartiest appreciation for ably managing the discussion. To you, the participants, we do value your time and involvement and contribution. Without you, our efforts would have been futile, nor would we have had such a fantastic time. The National Insurance Services hope that your attendance today was a valuable learning experience, one that you will share with colleagues and friends, always mindful of the theme which says embracing pension reform, our future together. In other words, it's all of our business. Sincere thanks to the staff who made all the preparations and worked tirelessly behind the scene to ensure this evening's success. Thanks to the board of the NIS for their insight and foresight. Thanks to the print and electronic media for carrying this discussion live, and who will be reporting. We are counting on you to share the information gleaned with all of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And as a result of that, we are extending our advanced thanks as you assist the National Insurance Services in the dissemination of information on pension reform. I'm going to ask you to put your hands together for our esteemed panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.